The king kicks off a massive feast, raising his arms and telling everyone to enjoy the celebration. Nearby, Claire watches the crowd with a soft, polite smile. Even the thief deity looks excited, leaning in with an energetic grin. Then there's Basque, who just keeps his usual stony expression despite all the noise. But just as the praise pours in, Nova freezes because a glowing system window suddenly appears in his vision. He stares at it in silence, wondering why his skill is acting up right now of all times. Turning to the group, the king admits he never expected the boy he summoned 3 years ago to actually become a hero. Without a second thought, he tips his glass and dumps the wine right over the king's head. The king just stands there frozen, wine dripping down his mustache as he stares in shock. Realizing the insanity of his own move, Nova covers his face and starts sweating buckets. Knights and guards immediately surround him, screaming for him to freeze. He stammers out a frantic apology, waving his hands while sweating through his clothes. Even though he's terrified, he figures he has to keep going to prevent a major disaster. Without warning, he lunges forward and snatches the royal crest right off the king's neck. The golden pendant snaps loose, leaving the entire room in a state of shock. Guards instantly draw their blades as the theft registers. Silas jumps in and shouts for everyone to wait, desperately trying to de-escalate the tension. Shadowing his face in fury, the king demands someone bring him a sword so he can handle the execution himself. He asks if this is part of some Cooper quest, hoping there's some hidden logic to the madness. Looking like he might pass out, Nova just stands there shaking uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the rest of the party watches the chaos unfold, wondering what nightmare they've stumbled into. The floating window finally explains the madness, claiming that pouring honey wine on the king is the only way to save the country. Nova stares at the screen, realizing he just cleared to bizarre hidden quests by soaking the monarch and tossing his medals. Instead of being horrified, Didi just laughs and asks if he is really pulling his usual weird stunts during such a serious moment. Claire gives a small shrug, admitting there isn't much they can do to stop him once he gets like this. Staring at the chaos, Basque reflects on how his friend's skill always triggers a strange chain reaction that somehow works out in the end. Silas isn't buying it and demands to know exactly what this crisis is. Nova can only stutter back that he doesn't actually have an answer. Wiping wine from his face, the knight mentions that royal mages already looked into this power. Since Nova has no idea what the result of his actions will be, it's basically a prophecy skill that can't actually predict anything. Still, it's hard to argue with a track record of accidental miracles. Whether it's doing barefoot handstands to become a goblin chief or leading a swarm of bees to a dragon's weak spot, his life is just one long string of nonsense. Silas keeps arguing that Nova's skill and courage have saved them from hopeless battles before. Begging for mercy, he asks the king to at least spare the guy's life. Meanwhile, Nova stands there sweating, clearly dying of embarrassment. The king isn't moved at all, wiping wine off his face. The monarch argues that nobody can prove those actions were meant to avoid a crisis rather than just being a direct insult. Silas stays silent for a second, his expression turning deadly serious. Suddenly, he makes a massive gamble, promising to give up all his honor and titles if Nova is actually executed. The king freezes in shock, staring at his top knight in disbelief. Silas doesn't back down, insisting that every one of their achievements was only possible because of Nova's power. Placing a hand over his chest, he drops the ultimate ultimatum. He's resigning from his title as a hero effective immediately. The rest of the party is just as quick to throw their support behind him. They figure adventures would be boring without their friend anyway, even if sticking together means turning the entire kingdom into an enemy. Nova starts tearing up, looking at his friends in disbelief after they chose him over their own careers. Watching from the sidelines, the nobles look on in stunned silence as the kingdom's power dynamic shifts. The king stands there shaking, wine still dripping from his beard as he realizes he can't actually afford to kill off his only elite warriors. He finally gives in, announcing that he'll settle for banishment and ordering Nova to leave the capital immediately. They start heading for the exit, with Nova thanking everyone for sticking by him through the chaos. Silas watches him with a worried look, asking if he's really going through with this. Feeling guilty for ruining the celebration, Nova apologizes for the mess he caused. He starts walking away alone, looking back one last time to say goodbye. When Silas tries to follow him into exile, Nova stops him right there, insisting he was only ever the chore handler and that the others need to stay and be heroes. Just then, the guards start barking his name, yelling for him to get out of the city immediately. He starts heading for the gate with the guards, calling back that he'll send a letter as soon as he finds a place to settle down. Silas yells after him, telling him he better keep that promise. Waving one last time, he passes by a guard pushing a massive cart full of burning coals. Suddenly, the cart hits a snag and starts to tilt. It slams into the ground, sending red-hot coals and ash flying everywhere in a huge mess. The flames spread instantly, catching on the nearby banners as people start screaming, shouting for everyone to stop pushing. The guards try to manage the mess while bystanders trip over each other to get away. Instead of running, Nova snaps to long poles together and steps toward the fire with a focused look. The guards ignore his help and shove him back, shouting that he's banned from the castle for good. Behind the wall of soldiers, Silas screams out a promise to come find him no matter what. Reaching out, he tries to thank his friend one last time before the massive gates groan shut, finally cutting him off from his old life. He stands alone before the silent stone walls as the heavy echo of the gates finally fades. Looking down, he whispers a quiet thank you to the friends he's leaving behind. Since he never truly belonged in this world anyway, he's just glad they accepted him for this long. Turning away, he looks out at the open fields and distant mountains waiting for him. He figures if his departure keeps the country safe, then the sacrifice is worth it. Still, the weight of the moment hits him. From here on out, he is completely on his own. He settles into the dark woods, where the only company is the loud chirping of bugs and the constant croaking of frogs. Staring into the shadows, he starts to realize just how quiet it feels without the rest of the group around. Memories of their warm dinners together flash through his mind, recalling the times they'd all laugh and share a big meal. His stomach lets out a loud growl, making him regret not grabbing a bite before he left. Looking up at the night sky, he remembers wandering the capital just as hungry when he first arrived in this world. Back then, a strange window popped up in front of him for the very first time. It was his skill activating, claiming that buying 4 pieces of meat would somehow lead to world peace. Looking at a nearby food stall, he found the logic ridiculous, yet he couldn't look away. He decided to trust the prompt and ordered exactly 4, even though the vendor insisted 2 was enough. As soon as he pays, a large clear message pops up right in front of his face. He's left holding a mountain of meat, wondering if the system is actually serious about this being for world peace. Before he can even process the win, another window flickers to life. It warns him that a hungry man is about to appear. Just then, a heavy shadow looms over him. He turns around to find a tall, serious-looking warrior standing right there, staring at the food. This was his very first meeting with Silas. Back then, Nova was just a starving outsider with no idea how this world worked. Silas explains that he's actually the son of a noble family, but his father kicked him out for a training journey without a single cent in his pocket. Watching the guy scarf down the meat, Nova realizes they're both basically in the same boat. He figures sharing the food was the right move, even if the system had to force his hand to do it. Silas mentions rumors about the palace summoning people from other worlds specifically for their rare powers. Hearing that, Nova admits his own skill was labeled totally useless, which is exactly why he got the boot. He finds the whole situation pretty cruel. Wanting to repay the kindness of the meal, Silas suggests they travel together and officially introduces himself. Nova tries to give his full name while his mouth is still packed with meat, but he just ends up choking on his food. Somehow, the young noble hears Nova through all the coughing and decides to stick with that. As the name settles, Nova figures he should probably just aim for a quiet life in some remote village now that the king hates him. But those plans for a quiet life vanish when a massive quest window pops up right in his face. It's a brand new prompt telling him he'll find where he belongs if he just dives into the river. Staring down at the rushing stream, he suddenly hears a strange, heavy sound echoing nearby. Curiously, he peers over the edge to find the source, wondering if this is the start of the belonging the system promised. Below him, a massive tusked boar crashed through the trees. Directly in its path, a young girl runs for her life, desperately trying to outpace the giant beast. Nova's eyes go wide as he lets out a frantic shout. Noticing him in her path, the girl screams for him to move as she keeps running, but there isn't enough time to react before the massive boar slams right into the campsite. He looks tiny compared to the beast as it charges through, caught completely off guard. Kitchenware and lanterns fly everywhere as the beast tramples through his stuff. They both hit the dirt as the boar skids to a stop right in front of them. Scrambling to her feet, the girl yells for him to get up, warning him that the beast's tusks and blood are poisonous. She tells him to run for the trees the moment he sees an opening, but the monster cuts her off with a deafening roar. It's already gearing up for another charge, leaving them with no room to breathe. The beast lunges forward with a terrifying roar, closing the gap in a heartbeat. Screaming at the top of her lungs, the girl tells him to grab a vine hanging from the tree. Nova shakes his head frantically, shouting that there's no way he can pull that off. While she desperately looks for an opening, he just stares at the distance to the vine in total shock. Every second counts as those massive hooves tear through the dirt. The boar slams into the earth with a deafening crash, sending the girl tumbling back. Dust kicks up everywhere as she lets out a sharp, terrified scream. Watching her fall, he realizes he has to act fast, but then something catches his eye. He finds himself standing right at the edge of the rushing river with the beast ready to finish him off. Just then, that strange system message flashes back into view, insisting that his only path forward is to jump in. The boar is right on top of him, its massive snout and tusks closing the final gap. Realizing it is all or nothing, Nova takes the leap and hurls himself off the cliff. The girl freezes in disbelief, unable to process why he would actually do something so reckless. He screams an apology the whole way down as he plummets toward the rushing water. The giant beast slides to a halt at the edge, watching its prey vanish into the depths. Smashing into the freezing water with a muffled yell, the impact nearly knocks the breath out of him. He manages to grab a jagged rock and pull his head up to gasp for air, looking back toward the shore. But the relief is short-lived when a strange, translucent shape starts bubbling up right in front of him. It lunges at him before he can even try to swim away, latching onto his skin with a wet smack. Letting out a sharp yell, he feels it start to bite and realizes he's just stumbled into a blood-sucking vampire slime. The massive blob looms over him like a pulsing shadow, dripping cold goo onto his face. Trapped against the water, he can only watch as the monster starts to glow. Suddenly, the whole creature begins to vibrate violently, leaving him bracing for the worst. Instead of tearing him apart, the slime explodes outward and swallows the massive boar as it crashes into the river. The beast begins to dissolve instantly, turning into a heap of dark, bubbling mush. Crawling onto the bank, Nova sits there covered in slime and wondering if he actually just died. While he stares at the empty water in disbelief, a voice calls out to him from the trees. She waves from the far bank, clearly relieved to see him still in one piece. Running over, she warns him that this river is usually crawling with dangerous vampire slimes. When she realizes he took down that poison boar without even using magic, she demands to know how he pulled it off. Nova just stares at his hands, admitting he's just as confused as she is. Glancing at the water, she notices the slime itself is dead, too. Everything starts to click for him. After realizing the slime sucked up poisonous blood from the boar, she explains that's what finished it off. Nova just nods along, glad to finally have an answer. Beaming with gratitude, she thanks him for the save and introduces herself as Nina Safrina. Before asking for his name, he offers a tired, bashful smile and says his name is Nova. Nina asks if he's been camping out here in the woods all on his own. Shrugging, He explains that he had to leave home in a bit of a rush, only for his stomach to let out a loud, awkward growl. Since his gear is clearly trashed, she invites him back to her village for a proper thank you and a place to rest. He stares at her for a second, surprised by the kindness, before giving a small nod and agreeing to go. As he gets up to follow her, his clothes finally give out and shred into pieces. He tries to play it off by flexing, joking that it's just a special skill of his. Nina just stares and blushes, clearly not sure what to make of the situation. Just then, his system window rings out to confirm the river quest is officially cleared. It checks off the encounter with the vampire slime, though the final step remains hidden behind question marks. Meanwhile, things are getting messy back at the royal capital. Panic is breaking out in the halls as guards scream about an assassin being on the loose. Silas points out that if the king hadn't been busy changing his wine-soaked clothes, he would have walked right into the trap. A small fire breaks out in one of the towers, which the intruders take as a signal to start their raid. Racing through the hall, the lead assassin slips on the very metal Nova tossed away, giving the guards the chance to arrest the whole group. Basque and his team keep watch over the prisoners, still processing how the day turned out. Looking at the scene, Silas realizes that Nova's strange choices just saved the kingdom a second time. Silas just stands there in a daze, whispering the name of the man he treated like garbage. Miles away, Nova is in much better spirits, beaming with joy despite his shredded clothes. His system chimes in with a new objective, confirming he's officially heading to the village. They hike up the trail until Nina stops, letting him know they have finally arrived. Staring ahead in genuine awe, he looks like he wasn't expecting much from such a remote spot. Down in the valley sits a quiet little cluster of houses she calls Lara Village. It's a peaceful-looking place tucked away between the mountains. He sees the cozy houses scattered across the grassy hills. Taking it all in, he can't believe a whole community was hidden out here this entire time. As they get closer, a burly man named Rando spots them and shouts a friendly welcome. He is relieved Nina is back safe, though he's mostly surprised she managed to bag such a massive boar. She turns back with an excited wave, calling for him to hurry up so she can introduce him to the group. She introduces the big guy as Rando, the village chief. She doesn't hold back, telling him exactly how Nova stepped in and saved her from that boar. Looking impressed, Rando calls him a top-tier traveler and insists on finding a way to thank him properly. He mentions the timing is perfect since they were just about to start dinner. The boar is already safe to eat because the poison is gone, which leaves the rest of the group looking stunned. Confused, Nova asks how they could possibly know the meat is safe to eat. Nina just smiles and explains it's her own special skill. She calls it toxin sight, a power that lets her see poison instantly. To her eyes, anything dangerous glows with a nasty purple mist. She shrugs it off, though, telling him it's not exactly a top-tier power for a warrior. Hearing that, he practically screams that dodging a bad stomach is a legendary gift. He remembers all the miserable nights he spent bonding with the toilet during his travels. In his head, he figures having a teammate like her would have saved him from a world of hurt. While she laughs nervously at his energy, Rando watches the two of them, looking pretty amused by the whole exchange. The party gets moving pretty quickly as Nina points him toward a seat near the village's main building. A massive slab of roasted boar lands on the table with a heavy thud, looking even bigger now that it's cooked. He sits there with a wide grin, thanking everyone before he gets ready to dive in. A large knife slices right into the meat, and the feast finally begins in earnest. He takes a huge bite and realizes it's the best thing he's tasted in a long time. Seeing him enjoy it, Nina laughs and tells him to eat as much as he wants since there's plenty to go around. While everyone celebrates, Rando asks how a lone traveler managed to drop a monster that usually takes dozens of hunters to kill. Nina jumps in to explain the whole strategy of using the river and the blood slime to do the work. Hearing that the slime accidentally drained the poison and killed the beast at the same time, the chief just sits there in shock. Nova explains his skill is actually called when the wind blows. The barrel maker makes money. It sounds strange, but following its odd instructions always leads to a great result. Rando rubs his chin, admitting he's never heard of a power like that in his life. He just keeps repeating the word barrel maker, looking completely baffled. Realizing the name isn't helping, he figures he should have started with the most important part. He clears his throat and admits he was actually summoned to this world from a completely different one. The entire table goes dead silent, as the chief and Nina stare at him with wide eyes. He starts to worry he just made a huge mistake. Instead of being weirded out, everyone starts huddling around him in a rush of curiosity. They've heard rumors about other worlders having legendary powers and immediately ask if he's some big-shot official from the palace. Waving his hands nervously, he tries to clear up the misunderstanding. He explains that while the people he traveled with were hailed as heroes, he wasn't quite on their level. With his job in the party finished, he simply set off to wander with no real destination in mind, leaving Rando completely stunned. Nina's eyes light up as she suggests he just stay in the village for good. Rando chimes in right away, telling him that anyone who helped Nina is more than welcome here. Waving his hands in a bit of a panic, he tries to explain that he isn't actually that useful. But Rando just laughs, pointing out that he's already done plenty. He bellows for the villagers to bring out more food and drinks to make it an official welcome party. He tries to politely decline the alcohol, admitting he's not much of a drinker. As the sun sets over the quiet village, the celebrations carry on late into the night. Rando leads him to a small hut and says he can use the space however he likes. He warns him that it's right next to the dining hall, so things might get a bit loud. Waving a final goodbye, Nina promises to see him again tomorrow morning. With a grateful smile, he thanks them both for the warm welcome. Just as they're leaving, she calls out his name one last time. Moving closer, she tells him that even if he credits his skill for the boar hunt, she knows it was his heart that actually saved the village. She adds that no one could face a monster like that without real guts, no matter what skills they have. Because he stayed to fight, she admits she's truly grateful for his help. Giving him one last thank you, she turns and heads off into the night. Alone now, he watches her go, clearly touched by how quickly the village has accepted him. He finally heads inside and pulls the door shut, officially ending his first day in the village. Standing there in the sudden quiet, he lets out a small gasp as the reality of the situation hits him. Walking over to the bed, he starts checking out the sheets, still a bit stunned that he actually has a roof over his head. As he sits down, his mind drifts back to Nina and Rando, replaying their warm welcome over and over. It's a massive change from his life as a hero's sidekick, and he can't help but feel a strange sense of relief. He thinks back on her words, realizing she saw him as a person rather than just a set of useful skills. Smiling to himself, he lets the realization sink in. Looking out at the quiet night, he resolves to give this new life his all starting tomorrow. Meanwhile, things aren't so peaceful back at the royal capital. A high-ranking official barks at his men, frustrated that Nova has already vanished from the city. Despite expanding the search area, the guards come up empty-handed, prompting their leader to demand they find him no matter what. While the guards scramble, the king stands there looking completely crushed, realizing Nova actually saved his life. Looking at the group, she adds that he likely never understood just how amazing his power really was. Silas stays quiet for a moment, processing everything. Since he is traveling on foot, Silas figures he couldn't have made it out of the region quite yet. Instead of losing hope, they agree to keep scouring the area until they find a lead. The king laughs, noting that Nova still has a letter transmitter and his strange barrel maker skill to keep him safe. Dazing off, Silas just hopes the guy finds a spot where he can finally be happy. Meanwhile, the man of the hour is busy finishing up the chores at his new home in the village. He spent the morning sweeping and folding laundry until the dusty hut actually looked livable. Looking out at the quiet surroundings, he decides this really is a peaceful place to settle down. Thinking back on his travels with Silas and the group, he admits it was a wild, stressful ride. The morning light hits the village, looking far more peaceful than the chaos he left behind. Pulling up his system screen, he suddenly notices that every single quest is marked as complete. Seeing everything finished makes him worrying about the castle, hoping the king and the others are safe from any assassins. Just then, Nina's voice cuts through the silence, calling him out for breakfast. He steps out to meet her, but his eyes immediately drift toward a shimmering figure on a distant hill. Nina explains it's a statue of the village's first chief that somehow stays perfectly clean. Since the magic in the air is so thick, she figures a permanent spell must be keeping the thing polished. Once she suggests a fishing trip to show him the local sights, he's quick to agree. They head out together, but he quickly realizes this isn't going to be a casual stroll. Climbing uphill with his gear, he asks if they really need to go this deep into the mountains just to catch a fish. Nina explains that the closer rivers are overrun by slimes, which have chased away all the good spots. Hearing that, he wonders why they don't just hire some adventurers to clear the monsters out. Her expression falls as she admits the village is short on cash, especially since wild boars have been tearing up their fields lately. Hearing her talk about the village's struggles, the whole situation finally clicks for him. Nina gets fired up, imagining how finding rare animals or gimps could help them strike it rich. With that kind of money, she figures they could hire all the adventurers the village needs. Nova laughs a bit nervously as he listens, but she just stares at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Leaning in close, she gives him a look that makes him break out in a cold sweat. She insists that his unique skill is bound to lead them to something rare if he just gives it a shot. Still, he has to break the news that his power doesn't exactly work on command like that. Nina doesn't seem to care, leaning in with eyes literally sparkling. Nova has to shield his eyes because her expectations are just that bright. Closing his eyes tight, he tries to focus and prays for a lucky break. Right when he starts doubting himself, a system alert pings in his mind about a brand new quest. A giant notification banner appears in the air, explaining that if it rains, a rainbow light will guide them. Nova stares at the screen in disbelief, stunned that his skill actually worked. Nina is right next to him, bouncing with energy and asking what happens next. Checking the details, he notes the part about a 7-colored light and figures this isn't going to be a normal weather event. Suddenly, the window updates with a direct warning to find some cover. Above them, the clouds turn a deep gray and the birds start fleeing the area. A loud rumble echoes through the valley, and then the rain finally starts pouring down. They just stand there in the downpour, completely drenched. Nina starts yelling, demanding to know where the reward is, while he can only admit he has no control over how these messages work. Suddenly, a window pops up telling them to do radio exercises to keep their body heat up. He immediately starts stretching and shouts for her to follow his lead, but she can only watch him in total confusion. Eventually she gives in and joins him, following along with the weird count as the rain pours down. Right on the second beat, a massive splash erupts from the water right in front of them. Reaching out together, they snag a giant fish that glows with every color of the rainbow. This catch is massive, and it seems like the system's hint about a 7-colored light was actually talking about this monster. They heave the massive creature up together, and it's even more dazzling now that it's out of the water. Nina recognizes it immediately, realizing they've just pulled in the legendary golden ruby fish. Shouting in excitement, she explains it's a living jewel so rare that even high-ranking nobles never get to see one. Apparently, the thing is literally worth its weight in gold coins. When she starts praising his tracking skill for the miracle, Nova just scratches his head with a humble smile. But as they celebrate their lucky break, a rustle comes from the nearby trees. A dark silhouette watches them from the shadows, and the peaceful vibe starts to fade. Suddenly, a monkey monster leaps from the trees and snatches the giant fish right out of their hands. It gives them a cheeky grin as it makes its move. Nina freezes for a split second, her eyes going wide as she realizes their massive fortune is being stolen. Then she just snaps and takes off after the thief, screaming that she's going to turn it into grilled meat. She's got a terrifying look on her face, gritting her teeth as she charges ahead. She refuses to let their expensive dinner thus walk away like that. Reaching out with everything she has, she screams for the thief to stop. The monkey tries to swing away on a vine, but Nina actually manages to grab its tail and hitch a ride. Nova can only watch from the ground, stunned that she's actually pulling this off. They go flying through the air as the monster desperately tries to shake her off. Suddenly, the monkey fumbles, and she watches in horror as the giant fish slips from its grip and heads for the dirt. Nova shouts her name, his heart racing as he watches her launch herself through the trees. With a sharp grunt, she puts every bit of her strength into the pursuit. A heavy thud echoes through the forest as their prize finally hits the dirt. She sticks a hero landing, but the look on Nova's face in the background tells a much different story. He's completely stunned, unable to process the crash he just witnessed. While he tries to find his voice, a small object drops from the canopy and bonks him right on the head. It hits him with a heavy thud, nearly knocking the wind out of him. Scrambling to catch the object before it hits the dirt, he realizes he's holding a massive, patterned egg. An egg, he shouts, completely baffled because this definitely isn't the fish they were chasing. As Nina lets out a frantic scream from the sidelines, she watches their prize catch vanish in an instant. The golden ruby fish has shattered completely, but something alive is sitting in the middle of the mess. A baby monster, looking just as confused as they are. Everything is going sideways, and they've got a whole new problem on their hands. The woods go quiet for a second as everyone just stares at the little guy. Scanning the ground, Nina finds the hollow remains of the fish and guesses the monster ditched it because the scales were too hard. Suddenly, tears stream down her face as she calculates the loss, crying about how one fish could have funded an entire new village. Shoving the disappointment aside, Nova shows her the eggshell that hit him on the head, thinking it might be something even rarer. He tries to get her attention, but she's already way too busy wailing over the lost payday. Nina suddenly snaps her fingers and shouts that they should turn the egg into an omelet before someone else eats it. Looking at the empty shell, Nova wonders if she's actually serious about eating their lost payday. He notices several deep cracks spreading across the surface from the impact. Still, he warns her that the thing is ready to snap while she stands behind him shaking with nerves. Right on cue, the last of the shell gives way and completely shatters. They both freeze with their mouths wide open, unable to look away from the debris. Emerging from the ruins of the egg is a small, dragon-like creature with large ears and a wide-eyed grin. It lets out a high-pitched chirp as it looks up at them, officially ending their hopes of getting rich off the fish. The noise brings the village elder running, but he stops cold the second he sees what Nova is holding. Nova just grips the creature tight while someone else screams that it's a dragon. As the panic builds, the little guy just blinks its large eyes, looking pretty harmless. Even so, the neighbors aren't taking any chances and start scrambling away in terror. While everyone else panics, the little guy just lets out a massive yawn. Nova smiles down at him, figuring he's just worn out from the big hatch. Seeing the tiny creature, Nina and her friend can't help but gush over how cute he is. Not everyone shares the enthusiasm, as the village men look completely shaken by the discovery. They can't believe something this dangerous was living in their woods this whole time. As the baby drifts off to sleep, one of the men asks the question everyone is thinking: what happens if the parents come looking for him? Nova grips the baby dragon tight, admitting he's thinking about leaving the village to keep everyone safe. The elder listens with a grim expression, noting that he knows the terror of dragons all too well. While Nina stares in disbelief, he reminds them that the baby can't survive on its own yet. Suddenly, the elder's face contorts as he yells that there's no need for that. He shouts that if a single dragon could wipe them out, the village would have been gone ages ago. Pointing a finger, he reminds Nova that plenty of people here are former adventurers who still know how to handle themselves. The rest of the neighbors start laughing, agreeing that they aren't scared of some parent dragon showing up. They figure even if their houses get smashed, the money from the golden ruby fish will cover any repairs. gathering around with big smiles. They insist he shouldn't try to carry the whole burden by himself. When Nina adds that extra hands will make it easier to raise the baby, Nova just stares at them in silence. Looking at their friendly faces, he realizes they aren't casting him out. They're actually stepping up to help. Touched by their kindness, Nova gives them a huge, genuine smile as he thanks them for everything. It's a complete turnaround as one of the tough guys starts baby talking the little creature, gently petting its head while it chirps back. When Nova suggests the name Rand, the big guy freezes up and turns bright red with embarrassment. Eventually, the group pivots to debating a proper name for the dragon, deciding they should visit the local adventurers guild to finally identify its species. That night, Nova looks at the baby tucked into its basket and tells the little creature how lucky they are to have such kind neighbors. He decides it's time to get some professional advice and pulls out a magic teleporter tube. Since Silas is an expert on dragons, he writes a letter explaining that they're staying put and asks for a bit of guidance. Rolling the note up, he slides it into the cylinder and triggers a bright flash. The message vanishes into thin air, leaving him impressed by how handy these magic tools are for sending news instantly. A soft chirp from the basket signals the end of the day, and he finally heads off to get some rest. The quiet night doesn't last long, as a sharp knocking on the door jolts Nova awake. He sits up in a daze, hearing someone yell his name from outside. Peeking toward the window, he sees Claire looking panicked as she shouts that Pei-chan is gone. Turning to the basket, he finds it totally empty. The little dragon vanished while he was sleeping. Sprinting out the door, he follows Claire toward the middle of the village. A crowd is already gathering, and the air is thick with whirring. Nova pushes through the group and finally finds the little dragon face down in a pile of cabbage. Rushing over, he apologizes to the farmer for the mess and explains how frantic he was to find her. The farmer isn't even mad, but he warns that those vegetables are toxic because poison boars ruin the soil. While Nova panics about her stomach, Claire notices the creature seems totally unfazed by the toxins. She waddles over with a bounce in her step, acting like she hasn't a care in the world. Nova still watches her closely, asking if she's really feeling all right after such a sketchy meal. Suddenly, she lets out a loud, bubbly noise that sends him tumbling straight back into the tall grass. She looks pretty satisfied with herself, letting out a happy chirp as she continues on her way. Scooping her up, he figures that dragon biology must be built different, since that toxic cabbage didn't stand a chance. Since the boars ruin most of the harvest anyway, the farmer tells Nova he can have all the vegetables in the storehouse. It beats letting the food go to waste, and he beams as he clutches the chirping dragon. The villagers smile at the pair, glad to see the little one is healthy and hoping she grows up fast. A heavy thud shakes the earth, revealing a massive, scaled foot looming over the landscape. It's a pretty clear sign that her future growth might be a lot more than the village bargained for. A freezing wind suddenly whips through the fields, catching everyone off guard. They huddle together, wondering why the air just turned icy out of nowhere. Pointing toward the clouds, someone shouts that there is something moving above them. A massive, jagged shadow stretches across the ground, completely blocking out the sun. It's big enough to swallow the entire field, and it's pretty clear that something massive is now hovering right over their heads. Suddenly, two massive creatures descend, revealing themselves as giant feathered dragons that tower over Nova and his little friend. He stands there frozen, clutching Pei-chan, while these legendary beasts glare down with eyes like ancient stones. Staring up at the scales and claws, he can barely process the word dragon in his head. The stories were real, and it's clear they've come specifically for the baby in his arms. Back at the capital, Ranto is standing outside when his friends rush out with some big news. Holding up a teleporter tube, they shout that a letter from Nova just arrived. Ranto pops it open to find Nova checking in from a spot called Laurel Village deep in the northern forest. When Nina hears the name, she realizes the place is so tiny it isn't even on their official maps. Still, the letter sounds happy, with Nova even inviting them all to come visit if the king allows it. Tucked inside the letter, a detailed sketch of the little creature, along with a note asking for help getting it back to its parents. Silas stares at the image in total silence as he realizes this isn't just a normal monster. It's a legendary beast that ranks at the very top of dragon history. The girl smiles, noticing Nova's drawing skills haven't changed a bit since they were kids. It's officially a shining dragon, the kind of creature people usually only hear about in old myths. Looking at Pei-chan's happy face, it's almost impossible to believe he belongs to such a legendary bloodline. But that reality hits hard when a massive, ancient eye glares back from the shadows. This chilling gaze makes it clear that a true force of nature is now looming over the tiny village. They tower over Nova, explaining that they finally tracked a faint trail of magic to find him. These massive beasts aren't here for a chat, they're demanding to know who had the nerve to steal their precious egg. Identifying themselves as Vice and Sophie, the dragons ask if anyone truly understood the mistake they were making by taking their child. Hearing this, the elder and the villagers can do nothing but scream in terror. While everyone else is fearing for their lives, little Pei-chan thus lets out a tiny chirp. Looking as happy as ever, Nova gives the little dragon a gentle smile and tells him that these massive beasts are his real parents. Leaning in close, Sophie looks down with soft eyes, relieved to see her baby is safe and sound. Vice doesn't share that gentle vibe, though. He looms over Nova like a dark shadow, convinced the humans only kept the baby to drain its magic. As Nova tries to explain he just found the egg by accident, the dragon completely snaps. He calls all humans liars and decides they don't deserve to live. As the villagers scramble in a total panic, they scream for Nova to run while he still can. But he stays put, his face set in a hard look of defiance. Shouting at the top of his lungs, he takes all the blame and tells Vice to settle the score with him alone. He explains the villagers were only trying to help, even pointing out that the parents never bothered to search the forest for the egg. Looking down with a cold eye, Vice explains that humans are too small to understand their ways. He says a single dragon war could wreck the balance of the entire world. Hearing the tension, Pei-chan lets out a loud chirp to break the mood. Sophie looks down at him, her frightening gaze softening into a warm, motherly smile. Then, her expression changes as she notices something and tells Vice to wait a second. Sensing a faint, nasty magic on the baby, she points out that something feels wrong. Vice leans in for a closer look, his face darkening as he recognizes the energy. It looks like he knows exactly who is responsible for this. Sophie leans in and explains that Pei-chan was hit with a curse that should have killed him before he even hatched. Luckily, she notices the dark mana is almost gone because of the good food he's been eating. Nova stands there sweating, figuring those bitter poison vegetables he forced the dragon to eat were actually the cure. Realizing his mistake, Vice actually bows his massive head and apologizes for threatening the village now that he knows who the real kidnappers are. Nova just gives him a warm smile and says he's just happy the little guy is safe. Looking down at his small friend, he admits he'll be a bit lonely, but tells him it's time to go home. Vice watches the two of them for a moment before calling out to the boy. He pulls the little dragon into a hug, finally breathing a sigh of relief after all the tension. Sophie watches them with a gentle expression, realizing thus how much the boy truly cared for her child. Turning to her husband, she suggests they ask these people for a small favor. Vice agrees and addresses the village, explaining they need to hunt down the real thieves, but can't risk taking the baby into danger. Looking down at the boy, he asks if he'll keep protecting the little one while they're gone. Nova doesn't hesitate for a second, promising to do his best. Vice adds that he doesn't expect Nova to handle this job for free. Since he wants his child and the villagers to stay safe, he decides to leave behind a parting gift. With a massive flap of their wings, the dragons take to the sky, casting a shimmering barrier over the area before heading out to find the kidnappers. Nina watches them go with her mouth hanging open, stunned by the scale of the power she just witnessed. As the sky glows with that seven-colored light, the massive beasts shrink into the distance, leaving the villagers standing there in silent awe. They just stand there for a long moment, watching the trail of sparkles fade into the clouds. Nova keeps Paige close on his shoulder, finally able to breathe now that the village is safe. The terrifying threat is gone, replaced by a sky that looks more like a dream than a disaster zone. Nova stares up, mesmerized by the lingering rainbow glow. He can barely believe the sight of that seven-colored light filling the air. As the beauty fades, the dragon's parting words start to sink in. Vice mentioned that since the protective barrier was a rush job, it might only hold up for about a century, just 100 years. Hearing that makes him break into a cold sweat while he wonders what kind of person would even try to kidnap a dragon. Vice looks him right in the eye and says it's better if humans don't know the truth about those kidnappers. Sensing the weight of those words, he figures it's probably safer to just stop asking questions. Sophie reminds the baby dragon to listen to the humans before Vice gives a final farewell and heads back into the sky. They waste no time tracking down their target. Vice lets out a deafening roar, shouting that he is going to teach these insolent fools a lesson. Right beside him, Sophie dives in with her claws out, asking him to leave the finishing blow to her. Nova finally lets his legs give out and sinks to the grass, still clutching the baby dragon. He watches the faint silhouettes of his new friends fade into the bright sky, finally alone with the silence. Nina approaches him with a shaky look, admitting she's impressed he actually stood up to such massive creatures. He just stares ahead, feeling completely drained now that the adrenaline is gone. Then, his eyes go wide as a sudden realization hits him. He shouts out in a panic, realizing he completely forgot to check the results of his secret quest. Looking down at his hand, he sees the quest is officially marked as complete. Nina can't help but cry from the relief, while the elder just laughs and says Nova has some serious guts for pulling that off. Ignoring the praise for a moment, he pulls Pachin into a tight hug and promises to keep looking after the little dragon from now on. Just then, a strange light flickers and the image of a mysterious, elegant woman appears before them. She looks calm and otherworldly, standing tall in a dark, flowing gown. The whole group stands there in total silence, watching this new figure as she begins to fade away. As that vision disappears, we head far away to the royal capital, where the peace is about to be shattered. A knight rushes through the palace doors, reporting to the king that two massive dragons were just spotted in the northern woods. He explains they already flew off, leaving behind a monotrail so strong it set off every alarm in the area. Sweat beads on the king's forehead as he stares back in silence, barely able to even stutter out the word dragons. Not long after, an urgent summons goes out to Silas, calling him into the grand hall to figure out how to handle this massive anomaly. Silas enters the grand hall to find the king waiting with some pretty grim news. The king explains that the court mages have officially identified the beasts as a pair of legendary shining dragons. Hearing that name, Silas freezes on the spot with his eyes wide and his mouth hanging open. He struggles to believe such mythical creatures actually showed up right next to Nova's village. Still, the king's expression only hardens as he reminds him of the ancient stories. He says these dragons are famous for being able to wipe out entire kingdoms with a single breath. Silas asks if the dragons are still lurking in the woods, but the official confirms they've already flown far away. Looking out from the high castle balcony, the forest below seems perfectly still. It's a strange situation because there hasn't been a single record of these dragons appearing near humans in over a century. Depending on what they find, the kingdom might even have to put together an army to figure out why the beasts released so much power in that one spot. Instead of sending the whole army right away, the king decides to start with a scouting mission. Ranto stands at attention, listening to the command with a steady gaze. He accepts the order with a shout, ready to take on the responsibility. With his mission officially set, the hero begins his journey to track down the source of that mysterious power. But before Ranto can even leave, someone starts shouting for him and Nova, sounding like there's a big problem. Nova stops what he's doing to see where the noise is coming from. A village girl named Nina runs up completely out of breath, gasping that something happened to the fields. Looking over, they find a massive mountain of vegetables piled up high, towering over the entire village. These giant crops aren't just in one spot. They're popping up all over the place, turning the village fields into an overgrown jungle. Right in the middle of the leafy mess, the little dragon pops his head out and lets out a happy chirp. Nova suddenly goes pale as he puts two and two together, realizing this is the exact spot where the baby had a bathroom break. Staring at the massive mounds, the elder figures that dragon droppings must work like some kind of miracle fertilizer. It explains why the entire harvest just exploded out of the ground in a single day. But the sudden growth attracts some unwanted guests, and a massive poison boar charges straight for the crops. Before it can trample anything, it slams into an invisible wall with a massive flash of light. The impact sends the monster tumbling backward across the grass, completely dazed. Nova stares in disbelief, wondering how the creature was repelled so easily. Looking out toward the field, the group notices a strange, twisted tower of vines rising from the vegetable pile. He watches the boar struggle against the air, realizing the shining dragon's barrier is actually holding them back. Since the monsters can't get in, Nina figures they can finally farm without any worries. She even suggests they start collecting more of P-chan's special droppings to till into the soil. The elder agrees, thinking they'll finally have plenty of food stored up for the winter. With things looking up, Nina points out they can still have their big annual festival after all. Hearing this, Nova just blinks, wondering what kind of festival she's talking about. They stop in front of a grand stone statue of the village's first leader, which serves as the centerpiece for the whole celebration. Looking up at the monument, he realizes the event is a massive tribute to the day the town was founded. Both Nina and the elder turn to him with warm smiles. The old man admits they almost canceled the harvest festival due to poor crops, but since Nova saved the day, the party is back on. Because of everything he's done, they've decided to turn the whole thing into a welcome party for him. Blinking in surprise, he asks if they're really sure about making him the center of attention. The elder just gives him a reassuring look, insisting that he's officially the star of the show. He gives Nova a big thumbs up, announcing that he's giving him the honor of planning the festival's main attraction. Stunned, Nova just stands there with a blank look while he tries to process the sudden promotion. The elder claps him on the back, explaining that whoever leads the show has to debut something totally new from their own world. Back at the cabin later that day, his scream of disbelief echoes through the quiet woods. But while he's busy panicking, something metallic starts rattling around in the shadows of his house. Far away from the rattling at the house, the nearby forest stays quiet under the afternoon sun. Ranto leads his squad through the dense brush with a sharp, focused expression. He marches ahead while his team follows closely, scanning the trees for any sign of the legendary dragons. He asks Claire if she's picking up on anything out of the ordinary as they push deeper into the forest. Closing her eyes, she notes that something is very close and giving off a massive pulse of magic. That's all he needs to hear before ordering the whole squad to get into battle formation and move out. While the knights gear up for a fight, things are reaching a boiling point back at the house. A strange mechanical hand begins to stir. Nova wanders through the trees with the little dragon, still trying to figure out what to do for the big festival. Just as he starts hoping everyone stays safe, a sharp metallic click rings out nearby. Right on cue, a system notification pops up with a new branch in his quest line. It tells him to gather the blessings of the forest, making him wonder if he can find something useful out here. Looking at the screen with a grin, he realizes the system is actually helping him brainstorm for the upcoming event. Finally, two new objectives appear. He needs to find some local fruit and cook up a dish that tastes like home. He stares at the notification for a long moment, letting the weight of the new task sink in. Suddenly, panic sets in as he realizes the system expects him to handle every single detail of the planning. While walking deeper into the woods, he thinks back to his old life working at a bar back on Earth. He cheers about finally finding some apples, totally unaware of the glowing eyes watching him from the bushes. Down on the ground, Several pieces of bright red fruit are scattered in the grass. Suddenly, the monkey monster lunges from the shadows, swinging a blade right at his head. She misses entirely and screams in frustration, unable to believe she botched the sneak attack. While Silas lets out a high-pitched cry of alarm, the danger still hasn't registered for his owner. Finally turning around, he looks completely clueless about what just happened. He peers over a rocky ledge, blinking in confusion at the sudden noise echoing through the trees. Just then, a blur of movement breaks the silence. Ranto and the investigation squad burst into the clearing and form a protective wall in front of him. Gripping his sword, Ranto shouts out to check if he is hurt. Since they saw the ambush from a distance, they're ready to take on the monkey girl while he just stands there in the background. Nova looks on in confusion as the squad turns their focus away from the monkey girl and points their weapon straight at Silas. They realize this is the dragon hatchling mentioned in the reports and immediately accuse him of luring his parents back to destroy the village. Seeing the blades pointed his way, the little dragon doesn't back down for a second. He actually steps forward to protect Nova, determined to punish these evil dragons for threatening his friend. Desperately trying to yell over the noise, he begs Silas to wait before the misunderstanding turns into a real fight. Thankfully, the group settles their differences and finally makes it out of the woods. They arrive at a quiet settlement where Nova takes in the view, relieved that the fighting actually stopped. The monkey girl is still tagging along too, though she looks a bit grumpy about the whole situation. Gesturing toward the houses, Ranto officially welcomes them to Larwo village and confirms that everyone is safe. Silas seems happy to be there too, chirping loudly from the soldiers' arms. Relieved to see everyone safe, Vice lets out a huge sigh of relief. He apologizes for the late reply, admitting he was so busy he forgot to check his messages in the 10 days since they left the capital. Meanwhile, a woman studies the magical field, amazed that a dragon would go out of its way to create a barrier that blocks anyone with bad intentions. The peaceful moment is interrupted when Nina runs over to grab him for their next festival meeting. He finally feels his heart rate go back to normal, relieved that the chaos with the dragon has finally passed. Still catching his breath, Nova spots the villagers and waves them over to meet the group. The blonde knight steps forward and introduces himself as Silas. He explains that the king sent him to investigate the dragon sightings and any damage caused to the village. When Silas mentions that he and Nova were once in the same party, Nina freezes in shock. Staring at the official hero's medal on his chest, she realizes Nova's stories about his past were actually true. He laughs sheepishly, admitting he figured no one really believed his stories about being a hero. Silas cuts in to set the record straight, explaining that Nova actually received a high-ranking commendation for his service. To prove it, he pulls out a fancy display box holding a gleaming silver medal. Standing tall, the knight drops a real bombshell. The king has officially canceled Nova's exile and even sent along a personal apology. He leans in with a big smile, telling Nova they can finally head back to the royal capital as a team. Nova just stares at the gift in disbelief, clearly caught off guard by the invitation to leave his new life behind. Nina watches him closely, her face showing a bit of quiet worrying. Seeing the tension, the elder steps in to lighten the mood. He asks Silas to stick around for a bit, explaining that the village is about to throw a big festival. Slapping Nova on the back, the old man promises that their chef is going to put on a show nobody will forget. Silas thinks the party sounds like a great idea, figuring he can just send a letter to the capital instead of rushing home. As the group heads off to get a room ready, the weight of the last few days finally starts to lift. Nina claps her hands, relieved that his name is finally cleared, though she wonders if he's heading back to the royal capital. Nearby, the little guy chirps happily, seemingly just as glad the tension is gone. Giving her a warm smile, Nova explains that while he's happy the king understands the truth, he considers himself a member of the village now. He really wants to stay and make sure this festival is a success. She looks genuinely touched that he'd choose their quiet home over the city, admitting she's glad he feels that way. Shifting gears, he pulls out a list and asks if she can help him track down some specific equipment. Looking over the requirements, she wonders what kind of food he could possibly be making with these tools. Nova pulls out some fruit he found in the woods, telling her to look forward to the main event. Smiling, Nina says they should give it their all now that Silas and his crew are sticking around. Soon, the whole village starts buzzing with energy as everyone helps set up the festival grounds. While the others handle the heavy stirring in the kitchen, he gets busy with the prep work, finally looking like he's in his element. By the time the big day rolls around, the whole village is glowing under strings of festive lanterns and decorations. Raising his mug high, Nova calls for a massive toast to get things moving. Everyone joins in on the shout, making the square erupt in cheers as the celebration officially begins. The festival market is already buzzing as people drift between the colorful stalls. Pumping his fist, Nova announces he's ready to get to work while the elder cheers him on. He starts by giving the flat griddle a quick scrape to prep it for the heat. Finally, he sets out a huge bowl of thick batter and a pot of dark sauce for the main event. He grips his spatulas, ready to give the village a cooking show they'll never forget. First, a huge pile of shredded cabbage goes into the mix. The thick batter follows right after, filling the bowl to the brim. Moving with practiced rhythm, he stirs it all together until the texture is just right. He pours the batter onto the hot griddle, letting it sizzle as it forms a perfect base. Cracking an egg over the center adds a bit of richness to the whole mix. Next, he swirls in some dark sauce, spreading it across the surface with quick motions. A sharp flick of the wrist keeps the ingredients moving so they cook evenly. The mysterious woman watches from the side, looking curious about his unusual technique. Nova puts every ounce of effort into the work, clearly determined to give the villagers a meal they will never forget. He finally finishes the dish with a flourish, presenting the very first batch of steaming okonomiyaki. The dark sauce glistens over the hot batter, smelling better than anything the villagers have ever encountered. Nina and the village elder stare at the plate in complete disbelief. Having never seen food like this, they can only repeat the strange name while they wait to take a bite. Nina leans in with a big smile, caught off guard by the amazing smell. Nova explains it's a recipe from his old home, made with local fruits and vegetables from the forest. When everyone finally digs in, the reaction is instant. Silas can't believe that simple mountain greens could taste this good, especially with that strange new sauce. Chiming in, the little monkey girl proudly reminds everyone that she helped chop those veggies. Soon, the rest of the crowd starts shouting for a plate of their own. He just smiles and tells them to form a line while he gets back to work. He works the griddle with a pair of metal spatulas, flipping the batter into perfect golden circles. Villagers crowd the stall, watching with hungry eyes while the kids dig into their fresh plates. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he lets out a tired but happy breath. In the distance, the mysterious woman stands perfectly still while watching him from afar. Her expression is blank, though the strange markings on her face seem to catch the light. Just then, an ominous rattling sound begins to shake the air. Nova pauses for a moment, trying to figure out where that strange noise is coming from. Just behind him, the mysterious statue on the pedestal starts vibrating as sparks of energy crackle around it. Before he can even react, a massive tremor shakes the earth and a deafening roar echoes through the square. He stands there looking totally confused, unsure why the festive atmosphere has suddenly changed. Nina points and screams a warning, telling him the bronze figure at his back is actually moving. In the middle of the chaos, the mysterious woman erupts in a blinding light, surrounded by crackling rings of energy that reveal her true form as the Model 707 Golem. As her eyes snap open, she stares blankly ahead while her system confirms the reboot is finally complete. The golem scans the area, announcing that it is searching for its master. Silas can only stand there in a cold sweat, paralyzed by the sudden movement. Behind him, Nina and the elder freeze with their food in midair as the machine confirms there's no master nearby. Even the little dragon looks stunned. Nova watches as the golem decides to switch over to autonomous mode. It takes a heavy step forward, declaring it will now resume an unfulfilled order from 150,000 days ago. He just stares at the machine, unable to process the math. Suddenly, a quest window pops up with a bizarre new objective. He's being tasked with feeding the mechanical gent, and he looks like he has no idea how he's supposed to pull that off. A new quest notification pops up right in front of him, telling him to whip up something nostalgic for this mechanical girl. A heavy clicking sound rings out from inside her frame as the directive locks into place. She looks straight ahead with vacant, glowing eyes and calmly announces she's going to destroy every living thing on the planet. It's a terrifying shift, turning a simple cooking task into a desperate race to save the world. The golem stares ahead with wide, cold eyes while she announces the start of her final order. She calmly explains that her goal is to wipe out every living thing on the surface. Behind her, the villagers start panicking, shouting in confusion about how their local landmark turned into a weapon. Nova stands frozen as he watches the machine power up right in front of him. Just then, a new system notification pings into existence. It tells him he needs to serve a meal to the golem, which is a pretty wild request given the current threat level. The Model 707 golem in exactly waiting for a menu, and its eyes flare with a deadly light. Shifting its heavy frame, it starts moving with a speed that definitely doesn't match its massive size. As dark energy coils around its limbs, the machine turns into a terrifying silhouette. Seeing the monster gear up for an attack, Lan shouts for everyone to get back and find cover immediately. Before they can even blink, the golem lunges forward, tearing through the ground with a massive burst of power. Lan freezes on the spot with his spatula still in hand, his eyes going wide as the wind from the charge nearly knocks him over. Just a second later, the strike connects with the distant horizon, tearing a massive path of destruction right through the mountainside. Everyone is screaming as the forest behind them gets swallowed by the smoke and fire. Sophie watches in horror, but a system notification reveals the golem is actually being suppressed by a barrier. Even though it just leveled a mountain, its current output is only at 10%. Sweating buckets, the elder shouts in disbelief at the idea that such a terrifying strike was it holding back. Lan stands frozen for a second, his face pale as he processes the massive gap in their strength. He hears that these machines are relics from a lost civilization, built with magic that puts modern technology to shame. It leaves everyone wondering why such a legendary weapon would even be here. It gets worse when the system warns that the golem is about to wipe out everything nearby, sending the baby dragon into a panic. Lan looks like he's seen a ghost, stunned by the realization that their time is up. Seeing the danger, Vice immediately moves to the kitchen area to find some cover. He slams a heavy table onto its side, creating a shield for Nova so she can keep her head down and stay focused on the food. Knowing a piece of wood won't stop an ancient weapon, Lan shouts out for his absolute barrier skill to hold the line. A massive explosion of light slams into the shield as it struggles to hold back the golem's beam. Everyone huddles together behind a glowing wall, watching sparks fly just inches away from their faces. Gritting his teeth, one of the fighters tries to stay upright against the crushing pressure. Lan knows they can't just hide forever, so he calls for backup while the group scrambles to start the cooking plan. Answering the call, Sophie steps forward with a sharp focus to weave her magic into a binding spell. She slams multiple pillars of light into the ground, pinning the golem's limbs firmly in place. With the target finally stuck, Vice and Nina lunge forward together to buy Lan the time he needs. They charge in fast, their feet barely touching the ground as they close the gap. Lunging forward with a wild grin, Nina prepares to tear into the massive metallic frame. Beside her, dark magic limbs help keep the pressure on the enemy. Vice swings his blade and triggers his steel cutter skill, only to realize the armor is incredibly dense. In the back, Basque manages to stand up while Clea rushes over to help him grab his gear. Still focused on the fight, the swordsman shouts for Nova to get to safety while they have the chance. Lan just smiles, showing he has no intention of backing down. He stays completely calm despite the chaos around them. Watching him, Silas admits his sword isn't much use here. He realizes his friend isn't the type to run when things get dangerous. Just then, Lan notices a hidden quest notification pop up in front of him. It tells him to prepare a dish for the golem, giving him the hint he needs to end the crisis. He admits this is one hell of a challenge, but he still wears a confident grin. Gripping his kitchen knife, he acknowledges he has no idea how to serve the meal or what the fallout will be. Still, he throws on his apron and rallies the group, shouting that they are going to save the village no matter what. Vice leads a fresh charge, swinging his blade with everything he's got. Jumping into the fray, Nina adds her own strikes to the mix, desperate to find an opening in that armor. Despite the constant barrage, Nova doesn't flinch. She just stands there parrying their hits in total silence. Watching from the sidelines, Lan calls out her name as the weight of the situation finally starts to sink in. Sophie screams at Land, asking why nobody mentioned the village statue was secretly a living weapon. Looking just as overwhelmed, he admits he was kept in the dark too, though he starts connecting the dots to a legend about an ancient enemy the first village chief supposedly defeated. These golems were originally built for mass warfare, and they carried enough destructive force to wipe out the world's old civilizations. Seeing the true scale of the threat, Nina starts to tear up as she screams that the whole fight is impossible. Vice ignores her panic and grits his teeth, trying to keep his focus while the air grows heavy. High above them, Nova hovers in a swirl of dark shadows. Nina lets out a sharp cry as the golem prepares to unleash even more power. Even so, the two of them plant their feet and charge back into the fight together. They know they have to keep Nova busy, or the whole village is done for. Everyone scrambles to find their footing while Nova stands in the center of a swirling black aura. Silas and Dee Dee struggle to get up as the others call out to make sure they are still in one piece. Silas looks at his sword in disbelief, admitting that even with his sharpness-boosting skills, his blade couldn't leave a scratch. It's a scary realization because if his best attack failed, they have almost no way to hurt her. Just then, a bit of backup finally arrives on the scene. They apologize for being late and quickly join the rest of the group to help hold the line. Watching the chaos unfold, the mysterious woman looks on with a grim expression. She can tell that things are heading south fast. Nova looms over them, her mana already refilling for another heat ray attack. Watching the golem power up, Sophie quickly works out a plan to boost the shield while debuffing the machine's movement, wondering if that'll be enough to help them survive even one blast. Realizing it's basically a suicide mission, her face goes pale, but Bask keeps a steady look and tells her they have to go for it. Nova stares back with hollow eyes, explaining in a flat voice that her only command is to destroy whatever is in front of her. Hearing this makes Nina cry out that they're all doomed. Lan doesn't even flinch, firmly telling her there's still a way to win. Facing the massive weapon alone, he prepares to put his plan into motion. He stands right in front of her with the finished meal, and a system message flashes across the air to confirm he cleared the hidden quest. Staring back at him, she looks frozen as her programming hits a wall it can't calculate. When he holds up the burger, he tells her today is a festival day and offers it with a smile. He suggests she just forget her orders and have a bite, promising her it tastes great. Suddenly, a bright light erupts between them as the food makes contact. Keeping the plate steady, Lan watches with wide eyes while the meal starts to glow and swirl with energy. Suddenly, the glowing burger flies apart, sending noodles and meat tumbling through the air. Nova watches the chaos with a blank expression, admitting she doesn't understand the point of any of this. Seeing his hard work tossed around like trash makes Lan's eyes bulge as he screams about the sin of wasting food. Before she can react to the lecture, the whole greasy mess drops from the sky and hits her square in the face with a wet smack. Silas sees the opening and yells for the final strike. Taking advantage of the distraction, Lan lunges forward and starts shoving the noodles right into her mouth. He forces the whole pile inside before she can even process what's happening. Gripping her head to keep her still, he keeps jamming it in to make sure she swallows every bite. Her internal systems immediately start to overload, letting out a high-pitched scream that sounds more like a mechanical error than a human voice. Seeing the struggle, Silas rushes forward with his blade drawn and yells for Lan to let her go. She's already past the point of no return, her body jerking as the flavor and her destruction orders collide into a massive system failure. She wobbles on her feet for a heartbeat, looking completely dazed while the food still clings to her cheek. Her knees buckle, and she starts to tip over. Crashing face first into the dirt, she hits the ground with a heavy thud. Momentum carries her body across the clearing until she finally comes to a complete stop. Lan just stares at the silence, frozen in disbelief. Beside him, Silas wears the same shocked expression, trying to make sense of what just happened. As she lies there, Nova's eyes go wide and vacant while her internal computer spits out error messages. She mumbles about her settings being overwritten and weakly calls out for a master. Seeing an opening, Silas draws his sword and shouts that they have to strike while she's still confused. When Lan sees his teammate charging in, he shouts for him to wait. Startled, Silas stops in his tracks and looks back, wondering what Lan is thinking. While they argue, Nova just lies there in the dirt. She looks completely stunned, her mind clearly struggling to process what just happened. Leaning right over her, Lan calls her Golem-san and asks if she'd be willing to destroy something for him. She stares up at him as a strange new glow flickers deep in her eyes. He tells her to take all that destructive energy and point it at her own programming. Specifically, he wants her to delete the command that tells her to destroy the world. Staring back in silence, she looks like her internal logic is finally catching up to the request. Lan asks if she can actually pull it off, and she slowly starts repeating the order back to him. She agrees to target her own core of destruction. Right then, the air starts to hum with a heavy, mechanical vibration. Suddenly, a nasty cracking sound rips through the air, sounding like a mountain of glass shattering. Lan jumps back in shock, staring down at Nova as her body jerks under the pressure of his impossible command. Across the field, the rest of the party watches in a daze while her massive magical aura just evaporates. They notice her power shrinking down to almost nothing, leaving the area strangely quiet as the dust settles. Racing toward the center of the clearing, Silas calls out for her as he tries to reach the girl before the reboot finishes. Instead of Silas reaching her first, Nova lunges forward and throws her arms around Lan. He freezes on the spot, looking completely caught off guard by the sudden contact. Burying her face in his chest, she starts sobbing and shouting about how terrified she was of actually dying. The raw emotion in her voice makes it clear that the cold, mechanical logic is finally gone. Watching the reunion from a distance, Basque asks Clea if she can handle a full analysis of the girl's systems. She gives a short nod, confirming she is ready to look into it. She explains that over a long time, pieces of the golem's core were blended right into the statue's metal. Watching her work, the group can only stare in silence as they process the news. A soft glow hums between her hands while she handles the fragments. From the traces left behind, Clea thinks the first village chief defeated the golem and sealed it here for safety. But eventually, something snapped that seal and brought the machine back to life. He wonders how a simple village chief managed to handle a golem from an ancient civilization like it was nothing. Honestly, it leaves him questioning who that first leader really was to possess that kind of power. Silas eventually breaks the silence, suggesting they take the core back to the royal capital so the court mages can seal it for good. Admitting that would be a huge relief, Lan watches as they secure the core with a sharp click. That relief vanishes instantly, however, when a towering shadow lurches back to life. Panic voices cry out, telling everyone to get away as the massive figure looms over them. Lan stands frozen in shock while his friends scramble to find safety. They're all screaming for him to move, but he can't take his eyes off the rising silhouette. Then a blinding circle of white light erupts right in front of them. As the glare fades, Nova pops up with a huge grin and a crisp salute. She chirps out a cheery greeting to her master, asking if he has any orders ready for her. Lan just stands there with a blank look on his face, sweating as he tries to process his new title. He stares back in silence, wondering if he actually heard that right. Just then, A stray beam of light carves through a distant cliffside. Meanwhile, a group of monkeys is busy snacking around a campfire, totally unaware of the danger. They stop mid-bite, sensing a sudden, heavy change in the air. The energy hits the forest floor, vaporizing their campsite in a massive flash. Tumbling through the air, the poor creatures are swept away by the shockwave. The massive pillar of light doesn't just stop there, shooting high into the air and lighting up the whole horizon. As the flash begins to fade, a soft, round face appears, looking much friendlier than the world-ending weapon from before. Just then, the system windows start popping up to confirm Land cleared every objective for his hidden quest. Serving the nostalgic meal actually worked, and it even triggers a new notification about the golem's light bringing a new spring. Right as the season starts to shift, Nova gives a bright salute and offers a high-energy morning greeting to her new master. Ready for action, she asks if he has any orders for her to handle. He just stands there with a blank expression, completely speechless as he tries to process this massive personality shift. Finally, he lets out a loud shout, his face going pale as the situation sinks in. Nova doesn't notice his distress, cheerfully waving her arms and asking what she should destroy first. She even adds that she can fly, treating her new role like a game, while the rest of the group just stares. Still confused, Land looks over at Silas and asks how he could possibly be the one in charge. Silas notes that Nova actually rewrote her own soul, which is why Land was suddenly registered as her master. The news clearly hits Land hard, and he looks like he's about to collapse from the stress of the situation. Ignoring his panic, Nova casually suggests clearing out the whole forest to help expand the village. He shoots that idea down instantly, wanting no part of her destructive plans. As Silas points out, these machines are programmed for absolute loyalty to their owners. Even so, Land can't help but wonder if this bubbly personality is a bit too much to handle. The village elder is sweating, wondering why an ancient weapon was posing as the founder's statue this whole time. With a bright smile, she explains that a human got in her way and trapped her here ages ago. Since the spell could only be broken by something from that person's original world, the okonomiyaki sauce from the festival was the perfect key. Land stands there in shock as the pieces finally fall into place. It means the legendary first chief was actually a traveler from Japan, just like him. Still a bit skeptical, Land asks if she has a regular name. She strikes a confident pose and announces that her official title is Magic Golem 707. Thinking that's a bit of a mouthful, he wonders if they should pick something shorter. Silas suggests calling her Golem-chan, which gets a surprisingly happy reaction from her. She even promises to stop the talk of total destruction if her master tells her to. While Land still looks a bit worried, Silas admits having her under his control might be the only way to keep the forest safe. Land smiles and decides to go along with it, figuring they can make the situation work. Thrilled to finally have a job, Nova leaps into the air with a cheer. As they celebrate, Sophie watches them with a sudden look of concern. She explains that golems usually drain their master's mana to stay active, which is a heavy burden even for veteran mages. Realizing what that means for his own energy levels, Land's expression shifts. He hits the dirt before he can even take a step, his body finally giving out under the strain. He gasps out Nova's name as the group watches him collapse in shock. Breathing heavily, he looks up at her while she leans in close. She sounds genuinely worried for the first time, asking if her master is all right while Vice chirps in the background. Above them, the clear sky stays quiet as a heavy silence falls over the whole area. Land opens his eyes to find himself staring at a ceiling, feeling pretty out of it. Sitting up, he finds the whole gang waiting for him right by his bedside. Sophie leans in with a look of pure concern, wondering if his body can even handle the mana strain of being a golem's master. Before he can even answer, Nova jumps in to promise she'd be a peaceful golem from now on, even sprouting a tiny leaf on her head to prove she's harmless. Nova explains that leveling the festival grounds was just her way of helping with the cleanup. Wiping his forehead, Land is just relieved she's trying to be useful. Suddenly, a massive system window pops up to show their quest progress. They've checked off almost every requirement on the list, except for a final note about the golem's light-bringing spring. Land figures that light probably refers to the massive beam Nova used to blast the forest. While it sounds a bit intense, it's the only lead they really have. Nina points out that Silas and the knights still haven't returned from checking on the woods. Looking outside, she starts to worrying about what could be taking them so long. Just then, a frantic warning cuts her off as a massive tide of slimes begins pouring toward the village. The villagers scramble in a panic as the elder realizes this is much worse than a normal slime encounter. Lan looks up and sees the creatures have even started taking over the trees, surrounding them from above. Leaning in with an eager grin, Nova asks if she can just incinerate the whole mess. Before Lan can give the order, Silas and his knights charge into the square to help secure the area. Lan notices the water level is rising and realizes the slimes are flooding in from further upstream. Stepping forward, Nina offers to guide him since she knows the forest best. He asks her to lead the way while the knights focus on defending the village square. With a sharp nod, she gets ready to head into the woods. Right as they start running, a system window flashes in front of them, officially starting a quest to find the source of the slime surge. The quest notification is the only thing catching their eye, because Lan pulls out a spread of sandwiches that are way too fancy for a monster hunt. Nina stares at the meal in silence, her eyes going wide as she looks at the food. As they take a bite, Silas realizes the filling is actually golden fish, an ingredient so rare it's basically a legend. She starts shouting when she hears the price tag, realizing they're eating something that costs more than a house. Even so, Lan just keeps walking and treats the whole thing like a normal lunch. As they keep moving, Nina mentions it's getting weirdly hot out here. Lan warns her to stay alert, since heat usually makes the slimes even more aggressive. Just as the humidity hits them, a massive geyser of water blasts straight out of the ground. She stares at the spray in shock, realizing they've stumbled onto a natural geyser. Nina shouts that this has never happened before, while Lan realizes Nova's beam from earlier must have cracked an underground water vein. Nova just cheers about the destruction. Suddenly, a quest window pops up to confirm they've triggered a heat sink. Lan realizes the blessing they need to bring spring is literally tied to these hot springs. Nina looks a bit confused, struggling to keep up with his explanation. Pointing at the geyser, he says they just need to find and wake up the rest of them to finally melt the snow. He notes that all this hot water means there has to be a heat source nearby, even if there aren't any volcanoes in sight. Stopping for a second, he watches the water begin to churn and bubble right around his feet. Just then, the ground explodes as a massive pillar of boiling liquid bursts into the air. Looking up in total shock, he realizes the heat source is actually a giant, steaming slime. The massive creature towers over the group, bubbling with intense heat and filling the air with thick steam. It looks like a giant king slime, but it's way more dangerous than a normal one since it's basically a walking vat of boiling water. Staring up at the beast, Lan and Nina freeze on the spot with their mouths wide open. They can barely wrap their heads around something this big being both alive and boiling. Smaller blobs keep wiggling out of the main mass, confirming this is where the whole invasion started. As the mountain of slime surges out of the geyser, Lan realizes it will just keep growing as long as the water flows. Instead of running from the toxic fumes, he pulls out his cooling plate, figuring a sudden heat sink is the only way to freeze this thing solid. Silas yells for everyone to retreat, but Lan is already committed to the risky gamble as the purple mist closes in. He narrows his eyes, finally connecting the dots about why these monsters are acting so strange. Usually, these slimes just eat forest scraps and keep to themselves without causing any trouble. But after devouring everything in sight, they started multiplying like crazy and turning into this toxic mess. Thinking fast, he figures all that extra energy is what's pumping out the weird heat. Nova offers to just blast the whole toxic mess away, but Lan immediately shoots the idea down. He's already wiped out, and he warns her that his mana won't last another second if she goes all out. Before they can even finish the argument, something cuts through the air, gripping his cooling plates. Land freezes on the spot as the ground begins to shift. The massive creature lunges forward, aiming right for the golem girl. He reaches out, shouting for her to run as the boiling sludge closes in. Instead of hitting Nova, the slime slams into the ground and knocks Land flat on his back. Knocked off balance, his bag flies open and sends his packed lunch sailing right into the monster's body. He freezes on the spot, eyes going wide as he watches the box sink into that steaming, translucent mass. The boiling liquid sizzles and begins melting the container instantly, swallowing his whole meal in seconds. Something small pops out of the bubbling mass and lands on the ground nearby. Picking it up, Land realizes it's a scale from the golden fish that the monster couldn't digest. He yelps and pulls his hand back because the thing is scorching hot. When Nina asks if he's alright, he barely even hears her. The heat vanishes almost instantly, leaving the scale freezing cold in his palm. Looking at the glowing plate, a new plan finally clicks into place. He shouts out the name of his new strategy, the heat sink, looking completely fired up. Sophie just blinks at him, asking if that's supposed to be some kind of fancy magic spell. Ignoring the confusion, he explains it's a cooling method that uses metal to pull heat away, figuring this is the perfect way to freeze the giant slime solid. A light bulb moment hits him as he works out the physics. Suddenly, system windows pop up, showing him new recipes for a spring picnic and a special golden quest. Holding the scale up with a confident grin, he calls it the Bucket Maker Quest and decides to use it right now, even though Sophie wonders if something that small can actually work. When she realizes he's serious, she reminds him they were supposed to sell those scales back in town for a massive profit. Seeing her pale and shaking, he just asks if it's a bad idea, while she looks like she's about to break down over the lost money. She screams out a tearful thank you, finally giving him the green light to move forward. Facing the steaming beast again, he figures it's time to see if his heat sink plan actually holds up. Planning on the fly, he tells Sophie they'll draw its focus so Nova can circle around the back. She just grips her gear, trying to keep up with the frantic pace. Suddenly, the creature lashes out with a massive, boiling tentacle that nearly clips them. He realizes getting close is a suicide mission, since even touching the liquid would mean getting scorched instantly. Just as things look desperate, a dark streak cuts through the air toward the beast. Land's eyes go wide as he realizes who just jumped in. She stands right in front of him, holding out a hand to block the danger. With a small, confident laugh, she tells him to just leave everything to her. She lunges forward without a second thought, heading straight for the massive slime. When Land calls out in a panic, she just looks back with a bright smile. She reminds him that since she's a golem, a little bit of heat won't hurt her at all. Watching her go, he realizes he doesn't need to worry quite so much. Suddenly, she stops and asks if he'll let her handle the rest of the fight. Holding up the glowing fish scale, she explains it'll help her deal with the heat. Since he hasn't said anything yet, she gives him a small grin to nudge him along. He can only stare back, his eyes widening at the suggestion. He hands over the golden fish scale, telling her to take it. He points toward the slime and asks her to aim right for its head. Hearing the plan, her eyes go wide with excitement. She gives him a look that says she's more than ready to finish this. She leaps high into the air with the golden scale, shouting for Land to leave everything to her. But the second she reaches the monster, it just absorbs her with a wet smack. Land screams in disbelief as the slime swallows her whole, leaving nothing but her legs kicking from its head. Suddenly, the slime's entire body bursts apart into a cloud of white mist. Land and Sophie can only watch in shock as the monster they were just fighting vanishes into thin air. Floating in the middle of the debris, she drifts slowly toward the ground. She blinks, looking around with a dazed expression as if she doesn't even realize the fight is over. Floating down through the mist, she looks completely at peace as the world settles around her. She pops out of the white residue and waves a hand, calling out for her master with a big smile. Still, He can't even find his voice, just staring at her in total shock. When Sophie asks if she's actually okay, she just holds up those golden scales she was sent to fetch. Showing them off with a grin, she promises she's fine and starts looking for a spot to keep her prize. She ends up jamming those golden scales right into the surface of the massive sphere to secure them. Perched on top of the giant mass, she waves down to the others to let them know the setup is finished. Suddenly, the entire area begins to glow with a blinding light as her ancient magic starts to pulse through the core. The sudden pulse sends the temperature spiking, forcing Lan to shield his eyes as he wonders why the heat isn't dropping. He admits they desperately need a way to cool the air, and right then, the little creature lets out a sharp chirp. Lan watches with wide eyes, asking the little guy what he thinks he's doing. Ignoring the question, the creature just draws in a deep breath. Suddenly, he takes flight and unleashes a massive blast of ice breath right into the steam. Sharp icicles immediately sprout from the ground, turning the boiling mess into a frozen wasteland. Sophie cheers for the little guy, impressed by his powerful shining dragon blizzard. Letting out a happy chirp, Pui looks pretty proud of the result. As the frost spreads, the dark silhouette of the slime starts to settle within the mist. Its massive eyes seem dull and sluggish under the sudden cold. Finally, the entire steaming mass turns into a solid, white platform. The team regroups on the frozen surface, watching the last of the heat fade away. The silence is a relief as they look over the remains of what was once a massive threat. Sophie figures Pui's ice breath was exactly what they needed, and the little guy lets out a happy chirp in response. Turning to Nova, Lan asks what the plan is for the next step. He realizes that if they just leave this mess behind, the forest will be crawling with dangerous slimes forever, so he wonders if they really have to just wait for the poison to fade out. Staring at the massive frozen blob, he wonders if there is a way to just isolate the whole thing. A notification chime suddenly rings out, making him blink in surprise. A status window pops up to announce that their current mission is clear, but a new one is already taking its place. This time, the goal is to launch the slime straight into the sky. He stares at the screen in disbelief, wondering how they could possibly pull that off, just as Nova rushes over to grab his attention. She beams with confidence, explaining that she can turn the entire frozen spring into a floating island in the sky. By tapping into her built-in ancient magic, she can lift the whole thing at once. Watching her, he realizes this approach will keep his own mana consumption low. It actually seems like the perfect way to hit two birds with one stone. The rest of the group agrees, especially when they realize she won't collapse from the strain this time. Since everyone is on board, they decide to move forward right away. Immediately, Sophie lets out a startled gasp, her eyes going wide. Watching in silence, Lan can barely keep up as things move way faster than expected. Nova just grins and shouts that she's going for it. As her ancient magic surges to life, a massive burst of light gathers between her palms. Suddenly, the air begins to hum and the earth rips itself apart. Birds scatter in a panic as a massive chunk of the forest begins its slow ascent into the sky. It keeps climbing higher, leaving a massive crater and a wall of dust where the forest used to be. Watching from the edge of the village, Lan can only stare as the rocky island drifts further toward the clouds, a whole section of the world just gone. He stands there frozen, staring up at the empty space where the forest once stood. The sound of the world ripping apart still echoes while he watches those massive chunks of earth drift through the clouds. It's a sight nobody in the village ever expected to see. After the intensity of the spell, Lan finally blinks his eyes open, looking completely drained. He scans the area for Nova, calling her name as Sophie rushes over to grab his shoulders and help him sit up. Rubbing his head, he gradually asks what exactly just happened to the forest. Just then, he spots Nova waving from a distance, looking like she hasn't lost a bit of energy. She beams at him and shouts that the entire launch was a massive success. They walk over to the edge and look down at the world they just left behind. Staring at the tiny landscape below, he stays silent for a long moment. The height is hard to process, leaving him only able to whisper about how incredible it is. Lan suddenly snaps out of his daze, frantically asking what happened to the giant slime. Looking up, he sees the massive frozen block still hanging in the sky like a dark moon. Without warning, the structure gives way, raining down and crashing into the water far below. The ripples eventually settle, leaving the surface calm once again. Finally, a single tiny slime pops up, bobbing peacefully on the waves as if nothing ever happened. Lan notices the water is draining back into the underground reservoir while holding Pui, but Nova is way too distracted by her own embarrassment. Apparently, she's mortified that her golden scales were showing. Rushing over to the newly formed pond, she quickly snaps out of it when she realizes the water is as warm as a bath. He watches her with a blank stare, struggling to keep up with the sudden shift in mood. Suddenly, she starts kicking off her shoes to dive in, forcing him to yell for everyone to slow down as the whole group gets ready to jump. Everyone eventually settles down at the water's edge, dipping their legs in to let the warmth soak through their tired bodies. Finding it hard to believe how good this feels, Vice just sits there with a wide, happy grin. When the heat finally reaches her core, Nova closes her eyes and admits she's finally starting to thaw out. Beside her, Lan lets out a long, heavy breath, looking like a guy who just finished a triple shift. He feels a sudden surge of energy as his mana starts refilling way faster than normal. Nova notices the change immediately, shouting that his magic power is practically flying back into him. Looking down at her legs, she remarks on how amazingly clear the water has become. It seems like those tiny slimes are eating up all the impurities to keep the pond this clean. As he processes the idea, he realizes the heat itself comes from that natural cleaning process. It's a perfect, self-sustaining loop that keeps the whole place comfortable. While they relax, Lan asks if they can return to Laluo village soon. Nova beams, telling him she can link the island directly to her pedestal back home. He looks a bit confused by the weird sound effect she uses to describe the trip. Before he can even process the idea, she triggers the magic and sends them flying through the air. In the blink of an eye, the group tumbles onto the hard stone floor of the village square. He wipes his face, still feeling a bit dazed from the sudden jump. Looking around, he recognizes the familiar houses of Laluo village as Nova points out the stone pedestal they just landed on. She explains that touching this spot will serve as their permanent way back to the floating island. Just then, a villager comes running over, calling out to Nova in total disbelief. He asks if they were really the ones who made a giant chunk of the forest start floating through the sky. Land can only give a sheepish look as the man begs for the full story. The guy just stares at him in silence, waiting for the explanation to begin. He watches the forest island drift away, staring up at the sky in total disbelief. Still shocked, he asks if Land really just uprooted the entire habitat using the golem's power. Land explains that with the slime numbers down and the heat gone, the monsters should finally stay calm. As she beams with pride, Nova points out that the forest is now completely safe for travelers again. Looking much more relaxed, the man says he actually has a favor to ask Land. He suggests turning Laluo village into a bustling hub where adventurers from all over can come to rest. The idea catches the man and Nina completely off guard, leading the villager to ask Nova what he even means. Recalling a previous talk, Lan mentions how Nina said the village was too poor to hire any real protection. Since then, he's been trying to figure out a way to truly be useful to everyone in town. He tells the man that having a solid place for people to rest would be a huge help for the whole area. With a bright smile, he figures that if travelers had a safe spot to stay, the village would finally see some life again. The villager admits the forest is actually pretty close to the capital, but the monsters were always too dangerous for anyone to set up camp. As he mentions using the hot springs on that floating island as a draw, everyone stops in their tracks. They can't believe he's actually serious about opening a sky-high onsen. Len points out it'll take a little work to get ready, but Sophie is already sold on the idea. She gushes about how rare it is to find a natural bathhouse like this so easily. She stands there for a second, her face turning red as the gears start turning in her head. Realizing the potential, she starts shouting about how this onsen could be even more profitable than the rare fish they lost. She immediately grabs the local elder, insisting that he needs to see the floating island for himself right this second. Before the poor guy can even agree, she drags him into the teleportation circle, leaving him screaming as they zip straight into the sky. Once the elder hits the water, his panic vanishes instantly as he realizes the hot springs are incredible. Seeing the success, Land calls for a meeting in the cafeteria to get their plan moving. By nightfall, the village finally settles into a much-needed peace. He finds Nova and lets her know they have to leave, since things are stable here. He figures it's time to head back to the capital and give the king a full report on everything they've done. Land asks if he's planning to head back with the rest of the group. Looking back, Vice just stares in silence for a long moment. Finally, he reveals that he's actually going to stay behind in the village. This catches Land off guard, since the exile is over and there's nothing stopping him from returning home. He admits he's incredibly grateful for everyone's help and the hero title he's earned. Still, there's a deeper reason why he can't just leave yet. Vice explains he wants to find something he can do here using his own strength instead of just relying on everyone else. Land wonders if this choice is tied to a specific quest he's been working on. Shaking his head, he admits he just really wants to try for himself, even if he feels like he's not quite ready yet. Hearing that, Land gives him a warm, understanding smile and says he gets it. Sophie watches the two from a distance, looking a bit surprised by the sudden heart-to-heart. Since the capital is so close, Land promises they'll visit again soon and tells him to have that hot spring ready for their next trip. He waves back as he sets off, leaving the village behind for now. Suddenly, a system window pops up right in front of him while walking down the trail. Glancing at the screen, he sees a long list of quests marked with big complete stamps. Every single objective is checked off, confirming he has finally found a place where he truly belongs. As the quest for becoming a resident of La Luo clears, he finally feels like his journey has a real purpose. A quiet, satisfied smile crosses his face as he looks toward the future. A few days later, word reaches the royal capital and leaves the king in total disbelief. Facing the throne, Land keeps his explanation simple, saying everything was just the result of working for the people's sake. Hearing about dragons, ancient golems, and flying islands makes the king break into a cold sweat, leading him to decide he needs to visit the village in person. Beyond just seeing the sights, he figures he owes Land a direct apology for everything that happened before. Before he can finalize any plans, a sharp voice rings out from the side, telling the king to wait just a moment. A young man stands in the doorway, dismissively calling Nova a failure with a useless skill. Turning around in surprise, the king realizes this visitor has already returned to the capital. He seems genuinely shocked to see him standing there. This is Reinhardt, another visitor from the other world, who clearly thinks he's on a much higher level. He warns the king that failures shouldn't be allowed to cause trouble or bring shame to the crown. Adjusting his gear, he looks completely unimpressed with anything Nova has accomplished. Smirking to himself, he offers to tag along on the king's upcoming trip. Since he thinks Nova is a total failure, he likely wants to see the village for himself. This new transfer is officially on the move, and his presence might just wreck the quiet life Land worked so hard to build. Back at La Luo village, things are still quiet, and the massive floating island is finally ready to become the region's newest landmark. Nova punches the air with a grin, announcing that work on his dream mid-air hot spring officially starts today. Hammering sounds fill the village as everyone gets to work on the site. Sitting in the water, a massive fire slime acts as a natural heater for the pool. Just then, one of the workers waves from the shore and apologizes for all the racket. The elder watches the progress, taking in the strange but peaceful scene. Sophie mentions that even though they know the slime is harmless, most people would be terrified to see it. Looking at the giant blob, her friend agrees it's a pretty wild thing to stumble upon. The slime seems happy enough tucked away at the bottom of the pool, but Nova thinks they should probably build a fence so no one messes with it. Nina waves and offers to handle all the underwater chores herself, eager to do her part. Watching her work, he realizes his magic power and draining nearly as fast as it used to. Following the golem's advice to simplify the island's functions really helped balance his energy. Just then, Lan calls out and invites him on a shopping trip to the royal capital to pick up some supplies. Stepping forward, he happily agrees to tag along. As they head out on the carriage, Lan remarks on how much the village has changed lately. He credits Nova for bringing energy to a place that used to just scrape by, enjoying the new, lively atmosphere. Curious about the history, Nova asks how a place like La Luo Village even got its start. Lan explains it began with just a few farms before retired adventurers started settling there for the peace and quiet. He mentions Nina's parents followed that same path, though they're actually still out working as active adventurers. He adds that Nina wants to follow in their footsteps, a treasure-hunting adventurer herself one day. Nova smiles at the thought, figuring she'd be pretty good at finding loot. Seeing that spark, Lan explains that's why the whole village is so behind the project. They want to build something that truly supports the next generation. Taking a breather on a park bench, they look over their long shopping list. It's a massive amount of stuff to track down. As they finally reach the outskirts of the royal capital, Nova stares at the grand buildings and starts wondering if their budget will actually hold up. He hops down from the carriage with a satisfied grunt, looking up at the massive stone buildings. He mentions it's been a long time since he was last in the area. They manage to gather the bulk of their supplies pretty quickly, feeling good about how much they've checked off the list. Then, Lan stops and gestures toward a side street, telling Nova there's one specific shop he really wants to visit. The request catches him completely by surprise. A new quest window pops up with a weird riddle, telling Nova that if he doesn't buy a magic sword, he'll somehow end up with one. Staring at the screen, he tries to wrap his head around the logic of getting something by not paying for it. Suddenly, a sub-objective appears, warning him to keep his true shopping list a total secret from everyone around him. While he's distracted, Lan stops in front of a local smithy and mentions wanting to check out a village specialty. Looking at the building, Nova realizes his simple errands just turned into a high-stakes stealth mission. He spots a sleek blade with glowing gems in the hilt and can't help but admire how cool it looks. Lan practically sparkles with excitement, asking if it's a replica from the royal blacksmiths. Thinking about the future, Nova thinks the sword would make a great decoration for the hot spring, though he suspects Lan just wants it for himself. Since the shop floor is quiet, he starts wondering if he can actually pull off that strange quest right now. Just then, a massive silhouette bellows about the price, comparing the cost to a luxury carriage. Startled by the noise, Nova turns around to find Basque staring right at him. He is shocked to see Basque standing right there, looking as huge and intimidating as ever. Lan doesn't seem bothered at all, greeting the big guy like an old friend. He explains that this is his go-to spot for weapon maintenance. When the blacksmith asks why they stopped by, Nova admits they're hunting for a replica magic sword. Lan watches them in disbelief, stunned that the normally quiet man is actually holding a conversation. The blacksmith suddenly starts rambling, going into extreme detail about the legendary history and quality of his work. Nova just stands there in silence as the wall of technical info keeps piling up. Suddenly, several fail notifications pop up across his screen. It seems he messed up the secret mission already. Since Basque is onto him, he realizes the difficulty for any other route just spiked. Meanwhile, Lan tries to do him a favor by asking for a discount, but the blacksmith insists his work is never cheap, even for a friend. Nova completely slumps over, dejected that his dream sword is now out of reach. He can't help but groan in frustration as the whole plan falls apart. Nova clenches his fists and shouts a desperate plea, asking if they can drop the price to just 30 copper coins. With his face turning bright red, he puts every ounce of effort into this one last-ditch attempt. Hearing such a massive lowball offer, Lan and the blacksmith just stare at him in silence. Lan calls out his name, clearly caught off guard by the sudden outburst. Meanwhile, Pui watches the whole scene from below with wide, curious eyes. When Bask finally snaps, he sends the two of them flying out of the shop with a roar. They tumble onto the dirt while he screams at them never to come back. Grabbing Nova by the shoulders, Lan demands to know why he'd offer such a pathetic price for a masterpiece. He can't believe his friend just insulted a professional's pride like that. While his friend rants, Nova nervously explains that his quest system promised him the sword if he followed these exact steps. Lan just stares back, looking even more confused than before. Back inside the forge, the blacksmith is still fuming, looking like a literal demon as he grips his hammer in the shadows. He starts hurling heavy hammers at them while they scramble away in a panic. Scared out of his mind, Nova begs for forgiveness as more tools fly past his head. Just then, one of the hammers strikes a horse pulling a nearby carriage. The poor animal rears up, catching the driver completely off guard as he loses control of the reins. Unable to steady the beast, the driver watches in horror as the entire carriage tips over with a deafening crash. The impact sends crates and supplies flying over the edge of the bridge, raining down into the river below. Nova lets out a panicked shout, watching helplessly as his shopping trip turns into a total disaster. Beside him, little Pui stares in disbelief as the situation spirals out of control. Everything hits the water with a massive splash, leaving nothing behind but wreckage. Suddenly, a system notification pops up to announce he cleared a hidden quest just by making the blacksmith this angry. The dust from the crash finally settles over the village square, covering his eyes. Pui looks like he can't handle any more of this disaster. Meanwhile, Nova stands there awkwardly as the worker bows and apologizes, explaining that the shop's entire delivery is now at the bottom of the river. Bask hangs his head, admitting that his own short temper is the real reason for this whole mess. Nodding toward the crates, he explains those materials were part of an urgent order he needed to finish. It turns out his luck has been pretty bad lately, since a thief broke into his shop just a few days ago and forced him to close for a while. As the day winds down over the city, things aren't looking great for the blacksmith. Nova sits by the water, feeling like a total jerk, realizing his quest chasing caused a massive mess for everyone. Trying to be supportive, Lan reminds him he was only acting for a friend and suggests they just focus on fixing things. Even Bask seems to have calmed down, since he actually asks if the system has given any new orders. When the next notification finally pops up, it tells him to find a school of killifish. He just stares at it, wondering why his grand adventure is suddenly turning into a fishing trip. Right on cue, a whole school of tiny fish starts sparkling in the canal nearby. Looking closer, the group figures these must have escaped from the crates during the carriage crash. Since this is his only lead, he decides to follow them and see where they end up. The little guys are surprisingly fast, darting through the water in a tight pack. He starts jogging down the stone path to keep his eyes on the trail. They lead him further away from the main road and deeper into the city's drainage system. Eventually, the school disappears into a dark archway tucked under the street. Peering into the shadows, he carefully steps inside to follow the water into the tunnel. He reaches a heavy iron gate that seems to block the way forward. The little killifish don't even slow down, darting right through the narrow gaps and into the darkness. Grabbing hold of the rusty iron, he finds that the bars are loose enough to pull aside. Once inside, it's so dark he can't see a thing as he warns the others to watch their step in the cramped tunnel. As they move through the gloom, Nova reminds Bask about the thief that broke into his shop earlier. He figures that criminals might be using secret passages like this to move around the city undetected. Just then, a sudden clatter echoes from the darkness further down the tunnel. Stepping out of the shadows, he finds a stone warehouse filled with crates and realizes they've stumbled into a hideout. Nova peeks over a heavy barrel and wonders exactly what he's looking at. Peering into the open crates, he spots expensive leather, recovery potions, and even piles of rare mithril silver. A sudden clatter echoes through the stone room, making him duck back down. Shadows stretch across the far wall as something moves near the staircase. When the figures step into the light, he realizes they're lizardmen monsters hauling sacks of stolen goods. They complain about having a bad haul today, grumbling that the carriage they were targeting crashed and ruined their plans. Nova and the others watch from the shadows, barely breathing as they listen. Basque looks especially annoyed to hear that his accident was actually their missed opportunity. He stares at them, finally processing the fact that the thieves were right there waiting for the shipment to arrive. While the lizardmen keep talking, he realizes these guys are definitely the ones who have been terrorizing the local shops. Just then, a system window pops up with a fresh quest to return the stolen goods to their rightful owner. Nova steps out from cover and shouts for the thieves to halt. Standing his ground, he demands they return the stolen items right now. The lizardmen freeze in shock, wondering how anyone even found their secret hideout. Recovering quickly, the leader barks out an order to take the intruders out. Suddenly, a massive shadowy figure looms behind the group. It towers over everyone with glowing eyes, making the lizardmen look tiny. Basque doesn't let the giant shadow scare him, immediately stepping forward to slam a heavy fist into the nearest lizardman's jaw. While the big man handles the muscle, Nova gets stuck in a desperate tug-of-war with another thief over a sack of supplies. Clearly done talking, the blacksmith starts tossing bodies around and screaming with enough rage to shake the whole warehouse. Outside on the quiet streets, the sounds of the chaos are so loud, you can hear the screams echoing through the night. The noise wakes up the whole neighborhood, and word quickly spreads that the thieves have finally been caught. Spotting a piece of gold work, one shopkeeper realizes it is a stolen item from his own store. He holds the materials tight, admitting he had already given up on seeing them again. Now that the goods are back, the local crafters can finally get to work. Basque stands tall while the crowd offers their thanks. Overjoyed, the shopkeeper insists they visit his store later so he can reward them properly for their help. He pulls out a sleek, dark blade that catches the light in a strange way. Nova freezes on the spot as he recognizes it as a high-end replica of the legendary Dark Starbind. Blushing a bit, Basque explains that he went way overboard during the crafting process and made it far too expensive to sell. With tears in his eyes, the blacksmith holds it out and asks them to take it, figuring they're the only ones who can appreciate its quality. Nova takes the gift and realizes it's more than just a wall hanger, seeing the hilt glow bright white as soon as he grips it. Suddenly, the system window pops up to announce the quest is officially complete. Watching from the side, Reinhardt notes that an item this impressive will definitely liven up the king's upcoming visit to Laloa village. Nova just stares at him, completely blindsided by the sudden mention of royalty. Reinhardt explains he heard about the king's interest from Silas and wonders why the official notice hasn't arrived yet. Once the news finally sinks in, a loud shout of disbelief echoes across the entire village. Walking away slowly, he tries to wrap his head around how his quiet life just got a lot more complicated. Far away from the village, the scene shifts to a quiet, high-end mansion. A group of subordinates gather in a large room to deliver their latest report. Looking over his notes, a man in glasses explains that Nova doesn't seem like a threat on the battlefield. The noble thus gives a dismissive hum, clearly not impressed by the news. He stares ahead, admitting that the whole situation is really starting to get on his nerves. Looking over at his staff, he notes that they are all like Nova. They are all transferees with dud skills who were exiled from their old lives. Because of that, he can't understand why someone like Nova is getting pampered like a hero by the king. Still, a sharp grin spreads across his face as he watches the village from afar. He imagines the king getting into a huge mess once he actually reaches that village. Thinking he's the real hero, he plans to sweep in and save the day while Nova struggles with his junk skill. Meanwhile, Nova and Basque are already racing back toward Laloa in their carriage, hoping to keep the king's trust as things start to get complicated. They finally rattle back into the village on their carriage. Spotting them from the road, Nina and Clea shout out that the group is finally home. Both of them look completely drained from the rush, but Nina doesn't give them a second to rest. As she asks about the big case Nova is carrying, she warns them that a royal messenger has already arrived. Basque unrolls the scroll and confirms the rumors are true. Reading the message aloud, he explains the king officially plans to visit next month. While Nina starts picturing the village becoming world famous, Nova wonders how they'll even prepare for royalty on such short notice. The excitement quickly fades as they realize they can't afford a single mistake. If the hospitality is bad, they're afraid the king might just shut the whole place down. Just then, a system window pings with a brand new quest about the royal visit. Staring at the screen, Nova looks baffled by the strange title of the mission. It turns out the system wants the king to hit the hot springs so his loneliness can just melt away. Beyond just the bath, there's a new requirement to host a massive banquet for the royal visit. Seeing the specific goals, Nova and his crew immediately start cheering. They're ready to pull out all the stops for the party. Bass pumps his fist and rallies the crew, shouting that there is no room for mistakes on this new quest. He puts Nova and Nina on drink duty while telling the rest of the team to finish up the lodge's facilities. The two of them head straight to the storeroom to start organizing the heavy barrels and supplies. While they check the equipment, Nina's excitement keeps the mood light during the busy prep. Still, Nova can't quite match her energy. As he watches her work, he admits to himself that he still has one major worrying on his mind. Basque breaks the news that another transferee is actually serving as the king's personal bodyguard. He identifies the man as Reinhardt, a warrior famously known as the Castle Crusher. Apparently, he possesses an exterior leg skill that allows him to demolish entire stone fortresses with a single blow. Stories say he once wiped out a whole orc stronghold on the frontier without breaking a sweat. Hearing about a fellow otherworlder with that kind of overwhelming strength leaves Nova wide-eyed and silent. Nova thinks about the rumors, noting that Reinhardt is known for being pretty aggressive. It feels a bit strange for someone like that to visit such a peaceful place. Even so, he lets out a hopeful smile, thinking it would be great if they could actually get along. Putting those thoughts aside, the hard work pays off as the entire hot spring resort is officially finished. With the lodge and the baths all set, they're finally ready for the royal visit. A heavy hoof stomps down as a guard shouts for everyone to show some respect. Standing at attention, Nina and the rest of the staff watch as the announcer officially calls out the king's arrival. Just then, the king himself hops out of the carriage with a cheerful wave, greeting Nova by name like they're old friends. The king humbles himself right there, asking for forgiveness over the time he had Nova exiled. Hearing this, Nova starts waving his hands in a panic, insisting he was the one who was rude first. He quickly brushes the apology off with a bright smile, just happy to see the king safe and sound. While Pui chirps in agreement, the onlookers nearby watch the reunion with wide eyes. Then, Nova introduces the little guy as a legendary shining dragon. Looking completely overwhelmed, the king grabs the dragon and starts nuzzling it, amazed by how soft the fearsome beast actually is. He eventually looks up and spots a massive floating island in the clouds, realizing it's the hot spring resort he's been hearing so much about. Basque quickly confirms it, explaining that the whole village worked together to get the floating spa ready for his arrival. Nodding in approval, the king says he'll leave the outside security in Reinhardt's hands while he heads up to the resort. The hero gives a sharp, confident look, promising to handle everything on the ground while the king relaxes. Still, Nova wonders how anyone is actually supposed to reach the floating island from down here. He watches the guards for a moment, spotting the man everyone has been talking about. Seeing him up close, he realizes this is definitely the legendary Reinhardt. Eager to make a friend, he introduces himself and admits it's his first time meeting another person from his world. Reinhardt doesn't take the gesture well and slaps Nova's hand away with a sharp smack. He looks down with pure disgust, telling Nova not to act so familiar. Calling him a skill-less brat, he makes it clear they aren't on the same level. Nova freezes as the guard explains that other worlders were brought here to be elite protectors. He brags about the results he's achieved with his own legendary power, leaving Nova stunned by the sudden hostility. He stares down at the group, asking if Nova's skills are just as useless in a fight as the rest of his staff. Glancing at the man in glasses, Fukudo, he dismisses his luck-based skill as a total joke. To him, Shu's strength summoning is just as pathetic for a real battlefield. When he looks at Ten, he laughs off the red light green light power as a simple children's game. Leaning in with a nasty grin, he warns Nova not to get cocky just because things went well for a moment. He figures the king is only acting friendly because he's too soft-hearted. Nova stands there in stunned silence, unable to process that level of arrogance. Behind him, a dark and heavy energy begins to swirl around the elite guard. Reinhardt's face twists into a terrifying grin, making the staff wonder if he's actually about to destroy the resort. Shaking off the bad vibe, Nova heads back to his crew, who are all eager to hear if the king liked the tour. Fortunately, the king is already soaking in the hot springs and calling the whole visit a massive success. Nova sees his system window has updated, confirming the first part of his mission is officially cleared. Right under that, a new objective appears, telling him to keep the king away from any worldly worries until nightfall. Turning to Nina, he explains the goal and figures they just need to block out any stressful thoughts. Meanwhile, back on the ground, Reinhardt is already looking restless and bored with the quiet security detail. To kill the time, he reaches into his pouch and pulls out a small, dark sphere. He activates his Herculean strength skill, channeling a massive amount of destructive power into just his right ring finger. It is a specialized move that essentially turns his hand into a living siege engine. Balancing the ball against his thumb, he prepares to launch his little project with terrifying precision. With a sharp flick, the object shoots into the atmosphere, leaving a trail of light behind as it vanishes into the clouds. The sphere rips through the air, letting out a high-pitched whistle that echoes across the entire island. One of the young staff members, Nina, clamps her hands over her ears and wonders where that awful sound is coming from. Suddenly, the pressure from the object's path tears through the forest below, rattling the trees until the leaves fall like rain. Deep in the shadows, jagged silhouettes begin to screech in response to the signal. As the tree line explodes with movement, Nova stares in disbelief at a massive swarm of griffins turning the sky black. They dive straight toward the lodge, their sharp cries cutting through the air. Massive talons flex as the monsters prepare to strike the first target they see. Within seconds, the peaceful resort becomes a hunting ground for the swarm. They dive straight through the clouds, zeroing in on the floating island like a pack of starving wolves. Huge wings block out the sun, and their sharp talons are out and ready to tear through anything in their path. With the resort sitting right in their crosshairs, there is nowhere for the guests or staff to hide. Nina cries out in terror as the griffins scream through the air above them. Nova stands paralyzed for a second, trying to figure out why mountain monsters would suddenly fly this far. Glancing at the dark sphere Reinhardt launched, he watches it pulse with energy in the sky. It finally clicks that the tool was a lure meant to pull the entire swarm straight to the resort. Because the island has no protective barrier, the king is now sitting right in the path of the attack. Nova stares at him, stunned by how little he cares. Reinhardt just notes how big of a deal it would be if the king got hurt, sounding like he's talking about the weather. Pointing a finger, he tells him to go ahead and fix the situation with that Cooper skill of his. Nearby, one of the staff members is collapsed on the floor, his leg shaking under the weight of the guy's aura. When Nina finally snaps, she yells at him to move and threatens to tell the king everything. Reinhardt doesn't move an inch, just casually refusing to budge. As she stands there shaking with rage, Nova screams her name to try and stop her before she does something reckless. Reinhardt just watches him with a smug grin, clearly getting a kick out of the panic. Snapping into action, he tells the golem to fly Nina back to the resort immediately. She needs to keep the king distracted while he stays behind to deal with the swarm alone. As Nina zips away on the golem, Reinhardt watches them go with a look of genuine surprise. He's clearly shocked that Nova's weak staff actually has a way to fly. Turning back to the guy responsible for this mess, Nova yells out, demanding to know why he would ever do something so reckless. Reinhardt just gives him a blank, cold look. He admits he's doing all this simply because Nova's attitude gets on his nerves. He adds that it's annoying to see someone so talentless get showered with constant praise. Looming in the shadows, he promises to prove Nova can't do a single thing to save the king. Nova can only stand there and take the heat as the guy accuses him of just getting lucky and riding his friend's coattails. Fed up, he reaches out and grabs the jerk's arm. He snaps back that Reinhardt is just a slave to his own power, calling the skill nothing but a massive nuisance to everyone else. Reinhardt just grins at the insult, casually mentioning that he could wipe those monsters out and save the king in a heartbeat. Looking back at the island, he asks Nova if he thinks he can do it any faster. He keeps pushing, wondering aloud when that famous Cooper skill is finally going to be useful. Nova doesn't answer, his face pale as the pressure starts to sink in. Up in the air, the griffins start circling the resort like they've found their next meal. Fukudo stares up in disbelief, shouting that the monsters have them completely surrounded. Just as the panic sets in, Nina suddenly swoops into view on Golem Chan's back. She yells for everyone to stay calm, promising that they're already doing their best to drive the swarm away. Still shouting, he calls out for her to land before she gets caught in the crossfire. While his warning goes unheard, the king remains completely oblivious inside the resort. He is just relaxing in the water, happily asking for another round of drinks. Catching a strange sound from above, he pauses to ask what all the commotion is about. Fukudo quickly steps in to play it off as just some rowdy forest animals. But outside, Nina watches in terror as a monster dives right toward her, calling out for Nova in a panic. Its massive talons slam into the wooden deck with a heavy thud, bringing the threat right to their doorstep. Nina spins around, her heart sinking as a massive shadow stretches across the deck. Looking up, she finds herself face to face with the sharp, hooked beak of a hungry griffin. Terrified, she lets out a piercing scream as the beast closes in. Just as things look dire, Nova suddenly gets a wild idea and proposes a bet. The winner of the contest gets to be the boss of the other person. Hearing this sends Fukudo into a panic while monsters swarm the background. He points out that they can't afford to defy someone as powerful as Reinhardt. Adjusting his glasses, Reinhardt adds that their cozy life at the palace depends on being in the king's good graces. Still, Nova just shrugs, figuring he's only doing this to stay alive. Reinhardt looks down on him, saying Nova only survived this long with such a weak skill because of pure luck. Nova just takes the insult in silence. Turning the tables, he asks if Reinhardt is really okay with letting monsters run wild just because he has a better ability. The question seems to actually strike a nerve. A sharp scream suddenly echoes across the resort as the griffins dive toward the deck. Nina just watches in terror as the winged beasts swarm her and Golem Chan. Back inside, the king wonders what all the noise about. So Fukudo panics and claims a staff member just dropped a plate. Fukudo steps in front of Nina to shield her, trying to keep his cool while the massive birds loom over them. Whispering under his breath, he tells her to back away slowly and keep as quiet as possible. Things take a turn for the worse when a griffin smashes into a barrel, sending the king's expensive wine spilling across the floor. The creature lets out a sharp cry, looking completely focused on the wreckage it's making. As the noise gets louder, the rest of the crew rushes onto the deck to check if everyone is safe. He just stares at the mess in disbelief, realizing the lie about the broken plate is about to become the least of his problems. The king stands right in the middle of the wreckage, staring at the massive birds currently tearing the deck apart. Panicking, Fukudo rushes forward and shouts for him to step back before he gets hurt. Instead of running, the old man just gazes up at the beast with wide, sparkling eyes. He lets out a joyful laugh and reaches out to pet the monster, calling the sight incredible while Nina watches from the background in pure terror. Far above the chaos at the resort, a mysterious blonde girl flies through the clouds alongside a tiny white dragon. As the little guy chirps, she calls him Pei-chan and reminds him they are there to find a specific orb. Suddenly, a dark object streaks across the sky right in front of them. A swarm of angry griffins immediately gives chase, but Pei-chan just lets out a determined cry. He looks more than ready to outfly the monsters and finish the mission. Reinhardt calls out for him to wait, clearly annoyed that Nova is just doing whatever he wants. Ignoring the protest, Nova focuses his energy and triggers his leg power X skill. He launches himself toward the griffins like a rocket, leaving nothing but speed lines behind. He cuts through the air, catching the little dragon completely off guard. A massive boom rings out as he pulls up right in their path. Frozen in place, she stares as she tries to figure out where he even came from. Snapping out of her shock, the girl screams for Pei-chan to get moving. The little dragon chirps as they try to fly off. Watching from above, she scowls as their hunt is interrupted. Nova doesn't give them a second to think and dives headfirst after them. He lets out a surprised yell as the ground rushes up to meet him. A massive crash shakes the entire resort when he finally slams down. As dust kicks up everywhere, he reaches out a hand to steady himself. He taps the blonde girl on the shoulder, instantly triggering a skill called red light, green light. This power freezes her movement the second he touches her. Nearby, Nova frantically calls out for Golan-chan. Glancing at the massive stone foot, he notes that the monster is surprisingly sturdy. He figured his landing would have turned it into dust. Once the dust settles, the whole group stands around while Nova lets out a strained groan. Nova realizes that if the griffins stay put, he's going to lose his bet to chase them off. Instead of offering any sympathy, Reinhardt reminds him that he hasn't actually won anything yet. Glancing at the monsters, Nova thinks about how that magic orb would have been perfectly safe if it had just stayed buried in the dirt. He leans in close to ask if the thing is seriously about to blow up. The mysterious girl blinks, looking completely lost as she listens to them. Still, he laughs it off, saying that putting the king in real danger would be a disaster, especially since the item is set to break in 30 minutes. Pei-chan keeps a firm grip on the jade with its teeth, ignoring the blonde girl as she screams for it to let go. Fed up with the chaos, Nova yells that he's finished dealing with her nonsense. Reinhardt watches from the side, mocking her for being too weak to even control her own pet. When she tells him to stop treating her like a kid, he just shrugs and tells her to do whatever she wants. Still looking irritated, he turns his back on the whole mess. Hearing his name called, Nova stays tense as he prepares for whatever comes next. But he quickly decides that dragging the king into this mess is a terrible idea. Turning to the girl, he says he's letting her go so she can report to the king and stop the chaos. Reinhardt is baffled, wondering why Nova is worrying about a small village quest in the middle of a disaster. Clenching his fist, he admits he can't stand the thought of being too weak to protect the effort everyone put into this day. He tells Reinhardt that the people of LaRue Village saved him from dying in the streets, so he's staying to finish the job for them. Reinhardt stays quiet for a second, looking down as if he's actually thinking about the story. Suddenly, he reaches out and clamps his hand over Nova's face, catching the guy completely off guard. Just muttering "I see," he lets the words sink in with a dangerous calm. Nova immediately starts blubbering an apology while tears stream down his cheeks, terrified by the wicked grin spreading across his partner's face. Shaking in place, the kid looks horrified as he wonders what he did wrong. Instead of explaining himself, Reinhardt triggers a skill called Turn Disaster into Good Luck. Nova just stands there in confusion as a massive, dark shadow spills out from behind his friend. Sunlight glints off his glasses, hiding his expression as he keeps that same unsettling grin. The system explains it's a complete wild card ability that only activates when the user is in a real bind. Suddenly, a series of bright, jagged energy slashes erupt all around Nova, lighting up the entire area. The energy slashes tear through the area, sending everyone flying as the ground erupts around them. He holds his head and screams, caught right in the middle of the carnage. Suddenly, the blonde girl grabs his hair and forces him to a halt. A notification reveals she's using a skill called Red Light Green Light, which requires her to keep touching him to stay active. She stares ahead with a blank, doll-like expression while he sits there frozen in terror. That terror turns into a scream as Nova is sent tumbling through the air. He shouts back in a panic, calling them idiots for being so reckless. Just then, a system notification pops up right in front of Reinhardt, with a new objective appearing to make a celebratory blast rain through the sky. The blonde girl finally snaps out of it and shouts for Golem-chan to launch the orb as high as possible. Paige soars high into the sky, leaving the griffins drifting far below. It keeps a tight grip on the orb, looking a bit confused by the sudden order. Seeing her chance, the blonde girl dives toward the dragon and asks for the item back. Startled by the command, it lets go and sends the orb tumbling through the air. As it falls, she reaches out her hand and tracks the object's movement. Lunging forward, she finally snatches the orb out of the sky with a look of pure focus. It's finally time to set off the blast. The blonde girl puts everything she has into launching the orb high into the sky. Streaking toward the clouds, it looks like a tiny black speck against the blinding sun. Below, the king watches in silence as he stares upward, while even Pachin stands there in shock. Suddenly, the sky erupts into a massive flower of light that washes over the entire forest. The plan works perfectly, turning the dangerous energy into a beautiful celebratory miracle for the villagers. The king is absolutely loving the show, thinking the mix of hot springs, dragons, and fireworks was the best display he's ever seen. He's practically moved to tears, calling it a truly wonderful time. Turning back to the group, though, he notices they aren't exactly sharing his enthusiasm. While he's riding a high, they just stand there like empty shells, looking completely drained from the chaos. Before the mood can settle, the blonde girl suddenly points an accusing finger at the others. She calls out to the king, claiming these people did something terrible to Nova. Fukudo starts sweating, pointing his finger and insisting he only did what Reinhardt told him to do, while Sho watches with a bored expression. The king just stands there confused, asking what on earth is going on with his guests. Staring down at his hand, Nova gathers his strength to finally speak. After a long silence, he finally looks up with an earnest expression. He tells the king that everything from the griffin to the fireworks was just a big surprise the team prepared, even as his friends tremble from exhaustion behind him. He admits the whole show was a bit too dangerous and they all thus got a little carried away. Behind him, Nina looks completely shocked that he's actually making up excuses for everyone. Still sweating, he keeps the lie going and insists the important part is that the surprise was a success. The king stares at him in silence for a long moment before finally nodding. Satisfied with the answer, he turns around and tells everyone to start heading home once they've finished their preparations. Before they can head off, Sho pulls him aside, wondering what his angle is. He asks if this was all just a setup to make the group feel like they owe him a massive favor. While Nina and the others crowd around him, he looks completely wiped out. Sweat beads on his face as he admits he is out of mana and couldn't keep fighting even if he wanted to. Watching him struggle, Nova just gives a small, gentle smile. He suggests they stop arguing over who has the stronger skill. Since they are both transmigrators in a weird world, he figures it is better to just stop the rivalry and get along. Sho clenches his fist, still visibly annoyed by the idea of making peace. Looking at Nova's silhouette, he thinks about how a skill like Leg Power X is meant for hardened soldiers, not a kid. He wonders how long someone like that can even survive in a place as dangerous as the royal palace. Suddenly, he snaps and yells that even a grade schooler would know better, finally revealing he's only 15 years old. Nova's jaw practically hits the floor when he realizes his rival is actually younger than him. The kid shouts back that his height shouldn't matter, but Nova just laughs and calls him a shorty with a messed up skill. Watching the bickering from the side, Fukudo jokes that this bratty attitude is probably why a girl named Yami dumped him. Reinhardt stays quiet through the whole exchange, keeping a polite smile on his face. When Nova thanks him for the help earlier, he just waves it off and says he's fine with being unlucky if it keeps people safe. It sounds like a noble line, but a system message reveals the scary truth. Anytime something good happens to him, everyone nearby gets hit with a disaster. The tension finally starts to fade, but something else is coming. Nova takes a second to process how crazy his partner's skill actually is. It's called When the Wind Blows. The Cooper profits, and it can literally rewrite fate by pulling in everyone else's abilities. Reinhardt just gives a polite smile, saying he's glad Nova is the one he's working with. As they stand in the quiet field, he even suggests they should meet up and play again soon. Instead of agreeing, Nova storms off while shouting that there is absolutely no way he's coming back for a round two. As he walks away, the king calls out from his carriage, telling Nova he's looking forward to seeing more of his heroics. Sho gives a bright wave as he heads out, shouting a quick goodbye. Watching them leave, Nova finally looks a bit more peaceful after the long day. He sighs, admitting he's completely worn out by all the drama. There's still some cleaning to do once the drunken griffin goes home, but for now, the main job is over. Still, he figures that surviving life in the royal palace is going to be quite the struggle. That thought is interrupted when a mission complete screen pops up right in front of him. Seeing the word loneliness on the list, he wonders if the quest wasn't actually about the king's feelings after all. The thought lingers for a moment as he goes quiet. Looking up with a rare, soft smile, he decides it would be pretty nice if the world was actually trying to help him feel a little less alone. The king's carriage rolls through the silent forest, with small lights flickering between the trees as the group heads back. Suddenly, the world just cuts to black, leaving everyone shouting in total confusion as the lights vanish. Only their eyes and Reinhardt's glasses remain visible in the pitch black as they realize this isn't a natural darkness, but the work of a skill. Looking completely stunned, Nova breaks into a sweat as he wonders if a certain someone has finally caught up to them. He hangs out of the carriage, screaming Yami's name into the pitch-black forest as they speed away. Just a few yards back, a quiet figure slips through the trees, completely unnoticed by the group. It's Yami, and she looks relieved to have stayed hidden from the chaos. Pulling her cloak tight, she mutters about how close that encounter was and how life is always full of surprises. She's another transmigrator with her own reasons for staying in the shadows. Stepping out into a clearing, Yami wonders if this is the right path toward Lelouch village. She figures following the carriage tracks will get her there, seeing that Reinhardt and his crew are the ones providing the escort. A big smile spreads across her face, clearly relieved she managed to slip away without getting caught. She's set on finding any clue she can about the first chief of Lelouch village. Reaching that goal is her only priority, mostly because she wants to finally ditch her cursed skill for good. Meanwhile, Nova slowly opens his eyes as he wakes up for the day. He stares up at the ceiling, noticing a brand new notification floating in front of him. It mentions that if a traveler takes some medicine, the forest will turn into treasure, making him think today is going to be pretty interesting. The next morning starts bright and early with birds chirping over a quiet house. Waking up with a smile, Nova gives Paige a cheerful greeting as the sun starts to climb. The little creature chirps right back, looking just as energetic as he is. They eventually reach the edge of the settlement, their silhouettes standing out against the horizon. Reinhardt takes the lead and waves, calling out to ask if they've finally reached Lelouch village. A local confirms they've arrived, making Nova cheer with relief. He admits he was getting worried since the village ain't even marked on the maps. Looking up, the group spots a massive island hovering right in the middle of the clouds. Since rumors about the king visiting this sky-hot spring are all over the capital, they figure they should see what the fuss is about. Just as they take in the view, a massive pile of coins appears, sparkling brightly in the light. It turns out those coins are actually entry fees from the crowds already soaking in the steaming water. As Nova holds the collection box, Reinhardt admits he's impressed, figuring the place would make a perfect rest stop for tired adventurers. Watching the steam rise, the boy wonders if this is the traveler's healing his system mentioned earlier. Suddenly, Nina bursts in, gripping her head and shouting about how much work she has to do. She explains that the general store downstairs is totally sold out of medicine and healing supplies. Seeing a chance to help, Nova mentions he gathered herbs and can help with the compounding. This gets a grateful reaction out of her as she says that would be a huge help. While they get to work, she admits the cafeteria is also running at full capacity because the forest slimes have suddenly become docile. With the path being safer, way more people are making the trip up to the spring. Given how busy they are, she even suggests they should build an inn to house all the new guests. Holding a fresh leaf, he agrees that sounds like a great idea. He starts thinking about what kind of local specialty they could create for the village. By the next morning, he heads out to check on the area. Stopping dead in his tracks, he finds a massive field of strange, leafy plants that definitely weren't there before. He shouts out in shock, wondering what on earth he's even looking at. Reinhardt reaches down and grabs one of the strange stalks, thinking it's just a massive weed that needs pulling. The second he yanks it from the soil, the plant lets out a deafening, high-pitched screech that echoes across the field. Wincing, he grips his head and tries to block out the noise. Before he can even process the pain, he's knocked flat on his back as the group calls out for him. He looks up to find himself staring right into the face of a mandragora, which is finally out of the ground and looking very upset. Looking across the horizon, Nova realizes these aren't just weeds. The legendary rare plants have completely carpeted the entire field. As he covers his ears to block the noise, he nearly jumps when one of them actually demands to be heard. The fact that the plant is talking is even more shocking than the scream. It continues its loud proclamation, declaring this land their new paradise and a promised territory for their kind to prosper. Covering their ears, Nova and Nina can barely stand the intense volume of the plant's voice. It repeats that this land belongs to its kind, looking like a tiny, angry conqueror. Not stopping there, it brands all humans as their sworn enemies. Suddenly, the leader orders its brothers to charge, sending the entire field into a frenzied scramble to attack. Reinhardt prepares for the attack, while Peichen suggests just burning the entire field to the ground. Panicked, Nina rushes in to stop them, shouting that these specific plants are actually worth a massive fortune. Just outside the field, a group of travelers hears the piercing shrieks and begins to panic, screaming for everyone to run. While everyone else is focused on the noise, a system window suddenly snaps into focus right in front of Nova. The notification confirms his previous task is finished and issues a brand new objective. It's time for everyone to weed the field together. Nova shouts at the top of his lungs, announcing to all the nearby adventurers that a Mandragora Harvest Festival is officially happening. He urges everyone to jump right in and pick as many as they can carry. The little Mandragoras look up with big, empty eyes as the crowd repeats the phrase, "All you can harvest," in total shock. Stunned by the invitation, the travelers can only stare at him with wide, blank eyes. They have spent the last few minutes being terrified, so his casual attitude makes no sense to them. That shock quickly turns into a frenzy once the adventurers realize these screaming roots are basically miracle cures. It's a gold mine for materials, with the system confirming the plants can restore health and clear any status ailment. Everyone grabs earplugs and dives in, turning the field into a noisy but happy harvest. Smiling, Nova and his friends make quick work of the job, plucking the valuable roots like they're just gathering dinner. With their bags full, the group eventually packs up and heads back toward the village. They thank Nova for the haul and promise to return as soon as the batch of medicine is done. Behind them, the few mandragoras left in the dirt just stare blankly, looking totally dazed after the chaotic festival. Nina ain't wasting any time, grabbing her shears to start turning the harvest into medicine. Looking at the haul, Nova notices these mandragoras are massive compared to the scrawny ones usually found in the wild. Having a steady supply would mean they could produce as many miracle cures as they need. While Nina cheers about becoming a millionaire, a new system notification suddenly pings in front of Nova. The alert marks the weeding quest as cleared, but a new objective pops up right underneath it. The quest tells him to listen to the grass's lament, leaving him completely stunned. He thinks back to how the plants were screaming earlier and wonders if there's more to their voices than just anger. Narrowing his eyes, he tries to block out the noise of Nina's celebration. He braces himself and focuses every bit of his attention, waiting for any kind of signal. Instead of a quiet signal, he gets a face full of noise as the mandragora lets out a deafening scream. The force of the sound is so intense it practically knocks the wind out of him. Nina and the girls watch in horror, shouting to ask what he's even doing. From the outside, it just looks like he's trying to torture test his own eardrums. He grits his teeth and tries to endure the sensory nightmare. To him, it feels like a full orchestra of nails scratching across a blackboard. The noise is so sharp it feels like his head might split open. Gritting his teeth, he forces himself to focus until the ringing starts turning into actual words. They're yelling about being treated like food and chopped to death. One of the plants wails that the whole situation is a huge misunderstanding. It explains that the medicine humans want can be made from less the bumps on their bodies, making the killing completely unnecessary. Hearing the truth behind the screams, he just stares in disbelief. He clutches his head against the noise while asking if they really only need the bumps for the medicine. The mandragoras shout back that he's exactly right, demanding to know why they've been put through so much pain for no reason. Gritting his teeth against the ringing in his ears, he begs them to please just lower their voices. Suddenly, the entire field goes quiet as the creatures just stare up at him with wide, blank eyes. They start whispering to him, explaining that they store all their nutrients in these little head bumps as they mature. Sadly, most of them get harvested and killed long before those bumps ever appear. Realizing humans are just ignorant, the plants mention that the medicine could be gathered without anyone actually dying. Nova stands there processing this, looking pretty stunned by the tragedy of it all. But the quiet moment is shattered when a blade suddenly swings into view. Someone screams his name, rushing in to save him from the very creatures he is finally starting to understand. Nova yells for Nina to wait, stopping her right before she can swing her tool at the plants. He tells her he just heard something incredible from them. Nina freezes in disbelief, asking if the monsters actually want to have a talk. Swaying on his feet, Nova admits their voices are still ringing painfully inside his head, which makes Nina quickly apologize for jumping the gun. She realizes she can get the ingredients for her miracle medicine safely without actually pulling the little guys out of the ground. Leaning in for a closer look, she admits she has never heard of a mandragora growing bumps like this. It turns out these bumps are the real deal, but they apparently take 5 full years to reach this size. Nina looks back at Nova in total shock, complaining that she definitely can't wait 5 years for a harvest. Luckily, one of the mandragoras pipes up, explaining that the soil here is surprisingly good. Because the land is so rich, it only took them a single night to reach a size that usually takes 10 winters. The little plant offers Nova a small head bump, telling him that even a single drop of its juice is incredibly strong. Holding the tiny harvest, he realizes this might be the miracle medicine they've been looking for. He looks over at the exhausted man named Rand lying on the stretcher and suggests they try it out on him. Time to see if this stuff really works. Nova squeezes the small bump, letting the concentrated juice drip directly into the man's mouth. As soon as he tastes it, his face scrunches up in pure disgust. Sweating and grimacing from the bitterness, he looks like he is struggling to even swallow the potent liquid. Suddenly, he sits straight up with a shout, looking refreshed as the medicine kicks in instantly. Seeing his recovery, Nina is amazed they can get the medicine without even boiling the plant. Nodding along, Nova is just happy the new method works so well. The mandragora itself looks relieved, pleading with them not to kill its kind since they're usually wiped out by hunters. But the peace doesn't last long when Rand suddenly drops face first back into the dirt. Panicking, Nina screams that he died again while Nova desperately tries to keep the group quiet. After getting things under control, Nova turns back to the mandragoras and promises no one will ever pull them out of the ground again. In exchange, he asks them to stay in the field behind the dining hall instead of spreading any further. Since the village needs room for food crops too, he figures they can all thus share the land. The plants even seem to sparkle in agreement, happy with the new arrangement. Nova tells them their medicine is absolutely essential for any adventurer. Reaching out his hand, he asks if they can keep helping each other from now on. Just like that, the partnership results in a row of jars filled with sparkling medicine. Nina lines the jars up on the counter, and customers flock to the deal, staring at the price tag in shock. One girl asks for 10 jars right on the spot. Watching the rush, Reinhardt figures this is big enough news to share with the entire guild. Soon, the news travels so fast that the stock starts vanishing. Calling out from the dining hall, someone tells Nova that the medicine is officially sold out. Nina follows up by giving all the credit to Nova, saying this was only possible because he negotiated with the Mandragoras. Looking ahead, the boy imagines the village as a main base for adventurers heading into the deep woods. Rand is already on top of it, huddled over some maps with the other men to take the expansion plan seriously. Watching a Mandragora peek through the window, Nova just hopes everything keeps going this well. Suddenly, someone calls his name with a brand new problem. It turns out the problem is a massive piece of silver amber that's literally glowing with mana. Nina stares at it in disbelief, asking how he managed to find a treasure like this just lying around. As it turns out, the Mandragoras were the ones who spotted it while they were stretching out their roots. Nova says the rock was just getting in the way of their growth, so he decided to dig it out and see if she wanted it. He doesn't stop with the amber, showing her a rare golden beetle and even a firebird egg. Apparently, these things just fall out whenever he tries to prune a few branches. Nina grips the treasure tightly, her head spinning as she realizes the forest is actually a gold mine of rare materials. As a quest completion screen pops up, he decides it's finally time to go out and explore even further. As Nova plans his next move, Reinhardt chats with the Mandragoras about a little accident that just happened. One of the plants tilts its head in worrying, asking if the person who screamed is doing all right. Just a few feet away, the traveler is frozen in terror. Seeing a pack of legendary monsters just hanging out in a garden is more than she can handle. She stands there with her eyes wide, looking like she is about to give up on life. Memories of the past flood back, showing a time when everything suddenly went pitch black. A man shouts out into the void, frantically asking where the rest of his group went. When the fog clears, the scene shifts to the wreckage left behind. A merchant cart sits smashed on the side of the road, its wheels broken and supplies ruined. Shaking, Nova tries to apologize, but the merchant just screams that her useless skill ruined his livelihood. He makes it clear that he expects her to pay for every bit of the damage. Nova stands there staring at her feet, feeling completely fed up with the power she can't even control. While searching for a way out of her debt, she finds an old book mentioning a legendary power called skill change. It explains that a traveler from another world once had the ability to change their skills entirely. A spark of hope finally returns to her eyes as the idea takes root. If she can just find that power for herself, she might finally have a chance to change her fate. She screams at the top of her lungs that she'd do whatever it takes to change. It's a massive burst of energy that seems to fill the entire space. With the laundry in hand, her friend just stands there looking completely caught off guard. But as her emotions peak, the room falls into total darkness. Her skill is triggering again, leaving everyone and even Paige and shouting in the pitch black. They scramble in the void, asking her what just happened as the total darkness catches them off guard. Apologizing profusely, she explains that whenever she gets flustered, her skill just activates on its own and blinds everyone nearby. Fukudo tells her to just take a deep breath and try to relax. When the light finally snaps back on, the group looks relieved to have their vision back, leaving Nova huddling in shame over the mess she caused. Looking down, she realizes Yami is actually an other worlder too. She explains that she used to travel with Reinhardt and his group back in the day. Her hands tighten on her skirt as she admits her skill is called A Step Ahead is Darkness. It's a pretty plain ability, and she mentions having zero control over when it actually triggers. She eventually ran away from the castle to try her hand at adventuring, but she ended up broke and desperate. That's when she heard about the skill change ritual and realized it was her only shot at starting over. She explained she found proof in the royal records about other world travelers, so she's certain it's real. Fukudo looks shocked, asking if a skill that actually changes other skills is even possible. Adding to that, she mentions the person with that power supposedly built a village right here in this forest. Her eyes are wide with hope as she makes the connection. Realization starts to hit him, and he wonders if she's talking about the very place they're standing in. Nina looks surprised, admitting she's never heard anything about the village founder being special. Desperate for any lead, Nova clasps her hands together and begs to know if there are any relics or lingering magic left behind. As the others try to process the request, Golem-chan mentions that there is at least a statue of the founder nearby. Golem-chan drops the bomb with a cheerful smile, saying she doesn't have a skill change ability. Hearing this, Nova freezes on the spot with her eyes wide. She hides her face in her hands, looking like her world just ended. Because this was her last hope, the girl's emotions spiral out of control and shroud the entire room in darkness. Standing in the gloom, the others can't do much besides offer to make some tea to calm her down. Fukudo scratches his head, mentioning he never realized the first village chief was famous for having that specific ability. As he talks, Nova just keeps crying, terrified of the idea of being stuck with her darkness skill forever while Golem-chan watches her with a steady, wide-eyed stare. Suddenly, her gaze sharpens, as if she finally sees something hidden deep within Nova's panic. Golem-chan starts glowing with an intense light that washes away the gloom. Staring up in shock, Nova watches as the spirit's presence shifts from cute to divine. Looking down with a piercing, ethereal gaze, she asks if Nova truly wishes to change her skill. The heavy question hangs in the air, forcing her to consider the weight of such a request. Squeezing her eyes shut, she screams that she absolutely wants to change her life. Golem-chan accepts the answer and tells her she has to overcome a special trial to earn that change. She doesn't hesitate for a single second. Before she can even ask what that means, a blinding light explodes in the room. They both shield their eyes from the glare as the whole room goes white. Fukudo hears Pei-chan let out a high-pitched cry and notices the little creature looks just as scared as they are. Suddenly, a massive, furry limb slams down right in front of him. Staring up in shock, he realizes the tiny pet has grown into a beast in the blink of an eye. The massive face of their pet towers over them, making them look like tiny toys. He wonders if the creature actually got huge, or if they just shrunk down to nothing. Confused, Nova asks what is even happening. Her partner scans the room but realizes Golem-chan has completely vanished. Just then, a sharp screech echoes through the night as the beast heads for the open window. Golem-chan screams for her master, yelling that her body is moving on its own as she's yanked through the air. Before they can react, she flies straight out the window and disappears into the dark night sky. Nova and her partner stare in shock, realizing they have to follow her if they want to complete the trial. Only problem is, they're stuck on the ground with no way to catch a flying spirit. Looking back at them, Pei-chan seems to have a sudden idea. He realizes he's the only one big enough to get them where they need to go. He lunges into the sky, carrying the two of them over the village as they hold on for dear life. Flying in exactly what Nova expected, and she lets out a panic scream as the ground drops away. Back at the inn, Nina returns to the room with a fresh pot of tea to help everyone relax. Finding nothing but empty beds and an open window, she just stands there in total confusion. She stares out into the night, calling for Nova as she watches a distant shape vanish into the dark. High above the forest, Nova can't hide her excitement now that they're actually flying. Noticing a strange blue light, her partner leans in as a system window flickers into view. The notification issues a formal quest telling them to follow the golem to reach a glowing pond. It's the sign they needed, so he tells Pei-chan to start heading down into the trees. He wonders if it would be better to keep chasing from the sky, but the massive beast continues to glide lower into the trees. As they descend, a voice echoes in their minds, telling them to endure the trial and find the gray pond. Hearing the call, Peichin chirps back toward his master. Watching the trees rush by, he asks if the village chief's magic is really tied to that statue, but Nova admits the situation is a bit messy. Still, she insists they have to move forward. She figures Golem Chan wouldn't lead a friend into something dangerous. Nova pumps her fist, shouting for them to get moving. Beside her, he looks a bit worried, thinking about how the legendary village chief had to take down a magic golem himself. Just then, a system window pings with a new instruction to take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. He blinks at the screen, wondering if it's just a strange way to move through the woods. Taking the prompt literally, she starts shouting the first half of the rhythm to Peichin. He tries to talk some sense into her, asking if she's really going to follow those weird instructions while they're in the air. She doesn't even answer, focusing entirely on the quest rhythm as Peichin banks hard against a sudden surge of magic, looking down at the glowing landscape. Nova realizes this isn't just a simple game of following directions anymore. Her partner can only grin through the panic, admitting that the trial they're entering is the real deal. Even Peichin starts breaking a sweat as the weight of the situation finally sinks in. Looking over, the girl is practically frozen in terror, unable to even process the danger they're in. Massive stone slabs crash into the ground with a deafening boom, forcing them to navigate through a collapsing maze of rock. Nova looks around in a panic, wondering where these massive rocks are even coming from. Suddenly, thick branches overhead begin to weave together and shut out the light. Peichin watches in shock as the gap ahead slams shut, cutting off their escape. Clinging to her partner, she shouts that they've been completely locked in. With the path behind them gone, they find themselves deep inside a massive forest made of giant, tangled roots. Riding on Peichin's back, they navigate the thick undergrowth, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the ancient trees. The whole place feels heavy and closed off, leaving them with no choice but to push deeper into the maze. Massive, twisted roots weave together to form a long, dark tunnel ahead. As they fly deeper, the light starts to fade, leaving them staring into a pitch-black void that seems to go on forever. The tunnel ends abruptly as they run right into a massive magical barrier, completely losing sight of the village chief. Peichin hops onto a root as the strange energy hums all around them, shouting in frustration. Nina says they should have just stuck to the sky while Nova stammers out a sweaty apology. He pulls up his status window to search for a way out, but she doesn't expect much. Since his skill is just as useless as hers, she figures they are truly stuck. Just then, the little dragon tenses up and lets out a low growl at the darkness. Something big is coming. Nina starts to worry that she and Peichin have been locked in this maze with the local monsters. Sweating, she really isn't in the mood for a face-to-face encounter. Just then, a massive dark silhouette rises up to block their path. A giant snake lunges forward with its jaws wide open, and she can only let out a terrified scream. While Yami panics about being eaten, Nova tells her to take a breath and look closer. He notes it's just a regular-sized snake, nothing they can't handle. Not waiting for a command, Peichin lets out a sudden blast of fire. It catches the creature right in the face before it can strike. The snake drops to the ground completely charred, leaving Peichin looking pretty proud of herself. Still, Nova slumps over and wipes away some sweat, just glad that's over with. But that relief doesn't last a single second. A massive shadow falls over the group as a giant wolf-like creature looms from the darkness with dripping fangs. Shaking with fear, she points out that anyone would be this angry if they were shut away in a dark, narrow place like this. Even little Peichin lets out a sharp cry, sensing that the danger is ramping up again. It leans into the narrow passage with a vicious snarl, cornering them instantly. The path suddenly splits into several different tunnels, forcing a quick decision. Pointing toward a narrow opening on the right, Nova tells the group to dive in. He figures the small space will finally keep the massive beast from following. Still, the monster doesn't seem to care about the tight squeeze and comes crashing right through the roots, locking her eyes on the path ahead. Pei-chan pushes forward to keep them one step ahead of those snapping jaws. They aren't just running from one predator anymore, because a giant, multi-legged insect suddenly drops from the roots to block the way. Nina lets out a scream as the massive bug snaps its mandibles right in their faces. Looking up, the thing is absolutely massive, looming over them and making the narrow tunnel feel even smaller. Gritting his teeth, Nova realizes they've just walked into a total nightmare scenario. He shouts that they can't even turn around anymore. Right on cue, the Gentvolf skids to a halt behind them, snarling and closing off their only exit. Now, they're completely sandwiched between two apex predators with nowhere left to run. This tunnel just became a death trap, and the group is stuck right in the center of the crossfire. The two beasts lunge toward each other, creating a chaotic opening in the tunnel. As they collide, Nina screams for everyone to dive into any passage they can find before they're trapped in this maze forever. Suddenly, a strange system window flickers into existence right in front of them. Showing one quest cleared and a new one starting, the screen asks Nova to order his favorite bowl of dipping noodles. Ordering ramen in the middle of a life-or-death fight makes no sense, but the prompt stays right there in his face. Watching this, Nina yells at him to stop listening to that useless skill, since its advice has done nothing but put them in danger all day. She doesn't see how a menu could possibly lead them to the goal, especially when they're about to be eaten. Glancing back, he insists that even if it's weird, there has to be a hint hidden in the message. When she asks why he'd ever trust something labeled as total garbage, he doesn't hesitate. Still, Nova reminds her that this skill has saved his life and the lives of his friends countless times before. Seeing his confidence, she can't really argue. Nova admits the skill is confusing and has definitely caused some headaches for everyone in the past. Silently watching him, Nina keeps her doubts to herself for a moment. While they rush through the root tunnels on Pei-chan, she eventually gives in and asks what a noodle order has to do with their survival. He starts rattling off a very specific request, asking for light oil and hot noodles with total seriousness. Hearing him demand extra vegetables, she just blinks, wondering what could possibly be going through his head. Nova points toward a cluster of strange, dark plants hanging from the ceiling. He figures this matches his extra vegetables prompt and decides to head that way. Right behind them, the Volf monster is snapping its jaws, its mouth dripping with drool as it closes in. Just as the predator catches up, Nova shouts a warning that it is right on top of them. Looking back in a total panic, Pei-chan sees the creature's massive silhouette looming in the dark tunnel. But instead of attacking, the monster skids to a sudden stop right in front of the hanging plants. Since it is frozen in place, he tells everyone to move while they have the chance. Nina stays quiet as they hustle away, looking pretty unconvinced about the whole thing. Nova notices her mood and asks why she, in thanking him for saving everyone back there. He brings up how the famous heroes at the palace always brag about their big wins. It's a lot different from their current situation, where they're mostly just running for their lives. Shrugging, he admits he's just desperately solving these weird quests to survive. In his mind, he hasn't actually won a fight with his own power yet. Still, the group soon reaches yet another fork in the road. Staring down a massive wall of tangled roots, looking at the thick pine resin dripping from the wood, he realizes the light oil part of his quest was actually a clue. Since they need less oil, he directs Pei-chan toward the tunnel that looks the cleanest and has the least amount of sap. When it comes to the hot noodles part of the order, he figures that must be about temperature and points them toward the warmest air. Following that heat, Nina mutters that the first village chief must be having a blast watching them struggle. He agrees, figuring the old leader had a pretty twisted sense of humor. While she wonders why anyone would bother leaving such a complicated trap behind, Pei-chan lets out a sharp chirp. The dragon lunges toward a crack in the roots and bursts through into the blinding sunlight. Some light hits them all at once as they finally break free from the maze. They find themselves standing before a quiet, shimmering pool as the forest maze vanishes behind them. Looking at the still water, Nova wonders if they've finally reached the legendary Grey Pond while Pei-chan rests nearby. Scanning the area, he realizes they've actually made it all the way back to the outskirts of the village. Just then, she hears a familiar voice calling out for him from somewhere in the trees. Looking toward the shadows, Nina spots their friend waving at them and shouts out in relief. Their friend waves and shouts for them as they finally meet up by the water. Just as they get close, a tiny winged creature flutters over to give Pei-chan a warm greeting. Reaching out to scoop up the little dragon, the girl admits she's been looking everywhere for the group. She explains that she panicked when she went back to their room only to find it completely empty. Pei-chan just leans into her touch, looking totally at peace now that everyone is back together. That peace doesn't last long when Nova suddenly loses his footing and stumbles forward. He accidentally slams right into Nina, sending her flying through the air with a terrified scream. Unable to stop her momentum, she goes headfirst into the water with a massive splash. Bubbles rise to the surface as their friend calls out in shock, watching her sink out of sight. As she disappears, the rest of the group can only watch in horror, calling out her name while the water settles. Yumi shouts that Nova is still under the surface, her face pale with worrying. Just then, the villager friend notices that Yami has suddenly shrunk to a tiny size. She yells back that she has no idea why it's happening either, looking just as confused as everyone else. Despite the weird transformation, they turn their focus back to the water and keep calling out for him, but he doesn't float back up. Suddenly, Nina starts to glow with a blinding light. She freezes on the spot, her eyes wide as she looks down at her own sparkling body in total confusion. Just then, a beautiful woman with long, flowing hair slowly rises from the center of the water. She looks like some kind of spirit or goddess, emerging right in the middle of all that light. She stands tall and presents two different versions of Nova to the group. On her right is a sparkling, heroic-looking version that seems way too perfect. Hovering on the left, the real Nova is shivering and soaked, looking downright miserable. Then she asks the girls if they dropped the golden hero or this plain, pathetic one. The girls just stare back in shock, while the little dragon tilts his head in total confusion. Laughing at the silence, the goddess happily explains that she is actually the village's first ever chief. Even in his dizzy state, Nova realizes they are stuck in a real-life version of that old fable about the golden axe. A system notification pops up, marking the ramen quest as finished while adding a weird new rule about never asking for help in the pond. Nina breaks into a cold sweat just reading it. The spirit keeps smiling as she presents both versions of the boy, asking Nina to point out the one she actually dropped. Looking back and forth, Nina tells herself to stay honest. She knows she definitely can't try to claim the golden one, even if it looks way better than the original. Even though she is trying to stay honest, her face practically glows with stress as she wonders if she can really pull this off. Seeing the hesitation, Yami shouts from the sidelines and begs her not to fall for the golden trap. Meanwhile, Nova realizes the whole setup is just a copy of a famous fable from their world. A sharp glint suddenly sparkles in her eyes as she promises everyone she has things under control. She steps forward and shouts that she was the one who dropped both versions into the pond. Hearing the bold claim, the spirit just stares back with wide, blinking eyes. She can barely even manage to stutter out a response to such an obvious lie. Instead of folding, Nina shouts again that she dropped both of them into the water. The spirit just stares back with a hollow look, clearly not expecting this kind of answer. Standing firm, Nina points to herself and repeats the claim with total confidence, leaving the goddess silent and stunned. The spirit asks if that is really her final answer. Pumping her fists, Nina shouts a loud yes without a hint of doubt. Nova grips his head, looking like he's ready to sink into the ground after hearing such a bold lie. Even Yami covers her eyes, unable to watch her friend double down like this. Smiling down at her, the spirit says that for someone like Nina, there is only one possible reward. She waits with hopeful, sparkling eyes, ready for the verdict. The spirit breaks into a massive grin and happily agrees to let her keep both versions of Nova, stunned that her greedy gamble actually worked. Nina just freezes on the spot with her eyes wide. Behind her, Ten and the others look on in total disbelief as the reward starts to become official. Suddenly, both versions of Nova are tossed right out of the water. Nina lunges forward to grab the gold, hugging the figure while cheering about her big score. Stunned by the outcome, Sho just sits there staring blankly, seemingly done with the logic of this world. Watching the chaos, Yami officially declares the trial a success. She admits she only let it slide because the whole thing was actually pretty funny. After that, Yami offers her a chance to roll the skill change gacha. Nina looks a bit worried while she considers the choice. Since it's a gamble, the spirit warns there is no promise the next skill will actually be an upgrade. Yami explains her magic is finally running dry, meaning she'd be disappearing from the statue very soon. One shot, no do-overs. Nina's face goes pale as she thinks it over, while Yami tells her she just doesn't want her to have any regrets. Standing tall, the spirit explains that back when she was first summoned, her whole job was to swap out useless skills for ones that could be used in war. She looks toward the others, admitting that other worlders were basically just treated like weapons for the kingdom. Looking distant, she confesses she still doesn't know if any of those people were actually happier after their skills were changed. Turning the question back on Nina, Yami asks what she plans to do with this chance. The girl just stares ahead, her gaze distant as she reflects on her past. When she clenches her fist, it's clear just how much this choice is weighing on her. She admits that, because of this skill, she never found a place where she truly belonged. She explains that the royal palace gave her the lowest rank possible, which meant no one would hire her as an adventurer. As Sho watches her, she admits she felt completely lost in a world where she didn't know any of the rules. Still, she looks up with a bit of fire, saying she doesn't actually care about being strong. She just wants to be in a place where people don't hate her. But that's exactly why she finally reaches a decision. Looking at Nova with a firm expression, Nina declares she ain't going to change her skill after all. She chooses to keep the very thing that once made her an outcast, figuring she doesn't need to gamble to feel at home. Nova stares back, his eyes wide with surprise. Nearby, Yami watches in silence, taking in the weight of the moment. Smiling, Nina explains that meeting him in the village was the real turning point. She realized then that a skill rank doesn't define her value, and she doesn't need a rare power to find a home. Hearing this, Nova just looks at her, his expression softening as her words sink in. She admits that she used to blame every bad thing on her skill, figuring she just wasn't capable of doing anything. Turning toward him, she prepares to be honest about one more thing. She actually apologizes to him, admitting she only thought he moved to the countryside because he was a failure, just like her. Ten immediately jumps in to shut that talk down, shouting that he's a precious friend no matter what his skill is. Faced with all this support, he just stands there looking a bit overwhelmed. Nina looks down with a soft expression, thanking him for being patient with her sudden selfishness. He returns a gentle smile and tells her there is really no need for thanks. Watching the two of them share this moment, Yami lets a peaceful grin spread across her face. She claps her hands in delight, admitting how happy she is to see the village has become such a wonderful place. She starts reminiscing about how she used to hate her job and eventually deserted the royal palace with her friends. They built a home right here in the forest, spending their days adventuring and even constructing that maze for fun. Realizing the truth, Nova asks if that old base is what eventually became their village. She confirms it with a grin, adding that she even liked hosting the occasional traveler who wandered in. Her expression softens into a warm, gentle smile. Looking at them kindly, she says she'd be happy as long as they keep taking good care of the village. As she says that, she starts to shimmer, noticing her magic is finally hitting its limit. She mentions how nice it was to hear a request that wasn't full of greed for once while the group watches her dissolve. Flashing one last fang grin, She tells them she'd be rooting for them as she fades away completely. A massive flash of white suddenly consumes the area, washing out everything in sight. Nova and the others can only shield their eyes as the spirit dissolves into a cloud of glowing sparkles. Just like that, the trial is officially over, and the world starts to shift back around them. The last bits of that white light sparkle and fade away. Everything slowly comes back into focus. Golem-chan pops up with a huge smile, waving her arms and congratulating them for finishing the test. Just as they realize they're finally back in the forest, a sudden, sharp sound cuts through the air. A massive blade strikes out of nowhere, and Nova freezes in shock as someone screams. That blade turns out to be nothing more than a giant wooden log, and Ten is devastated. She hugs the tree trunk while bawling her eyes out, crying about how her golden statue of Nova is ruined. Watching the chaos with a quiet smile, Nina realizes her friend was just trying to get rich quick. Ten catches her look and immediately demands to know what she's thinking. In a last-ditch effort, she begs Golem-chan to turn the wood back into gold. The little guy just gives her a blunt no, leaving her stuck with a worthless pile of timber. After the chaos with the timber settles, the mood finally turns quiet. Nova asks if she really has to head out so soon, wondering if she wants to try the hot springs first. Shaking her head, Nina admits she is completely broke and can't justify staying for free. He watches her closely, still asking if she is truly sure about skipping that skill change. Seeing him so genuinely happy makes her realize how silly it was to blame her life on a rank, so she offers a warm smile and says she is done with the excuses. She looks back with a bright smile, promising to find her own way to get by from now on. Waving one last time, she tells him to expect great things for her next visit as she walks away into the distance. Nova stands there in the silence, thinking about her words and what it means to finally have a place where he belongs. He remembers how it all started, getting tossed aside by everyone just because of his supposedly useless skill. But everything changed when he met Silas and Nina. They didn't care about power levels or rankings. They just treated him like a person. Thinking back on their kindness makes him realize how much he has actually gained. A system notification flickers in the air, showing a long list of trial objectives that are all marked as cleared. As Yami's smiling face lingers in his mind like a warm memory, he looks at the card in his hand and promises to cherish the bonds he's made. He watches as Nina mentions how tough life must be for other transmigrators like Reinhardt. Since everyone is jealous of their rare skills, she feels like those people are only ever seen for their power and nothing else. Looking back at him with a soft expression, she admits she wishes they could all thus live a little more freely. He thanks her for the kind words, but the quiet moment doesn't last very long. Ten comes charging in with a brand new plan, suggesting they hunt for silver amber now that her golden statue is gone. Watching her get worked up about starting a quest for more loot, he figures she just killed the mood. Suddenly, a small voice interrupts from the distance as a figure pops up near the village. It's a mandragora, looking completely frantic as it shouts about a major emergency. The creature points toward a clearing where the forest trees have been completely uprooted. Nova and Ten freeze at the sight, their eyes wide as they try to process the scale of the damage. A massive trunk lies splintered across the path, looking like it was snapped by sheer force. Staring at the wreckage, the little creature wonders who could do this. Just when things felt peaceful again, another disaster hits. Nova stands in the middle of the mess, wondering who would do something so destructive. Looking at the broken trees, one of the mandrakes explains that greedy adventurers were likely hunting for silver amber. Apparently, they don't care what they trash, and lately, they've even been raiding village fields just to steal the fertilizer. A high-pitched scream suddenly cuts through the woods. Shaken, the mandragora warns that they're likely the next targets on the list. Ten is completely frozen for a second, gripping his head as he realizes the scale of the danger. Just then, the little plant creatures vanish into the bushes, and he tells Nova to stay sharp. The little mandragoras describe the terror of being pulled straight from the dirt without any warning by greedy hunters. Hearing this, Nova realizes this is becoming a recurring nightmare for the forest. He figures it's time to check in with Rand to see what's really going on. He makes his way back to the village and finds the man outside his workshop. As they sit down to talk, Rand confirms his fears, admitting that these reports have been piling up lately. He says having more adventurers visiting the village was supposed to be a good thing, but the reality has been pretty ugly. The forest is being trashed, and animals are being hunted left and right. Nina wonders why they would bother going into the wild when the village shop already sells materials. Shaking his head, Rand explains that a rumor about rare resources has spread everywhere, and now the whole royal capital is talking about their forest. Apparently, even the locals were in the dark about what was hidden in their own backyard. It's naturally created a massive stir, but he warns that the real problem is something much deeper. Rand explains that the forest technically in village land, so they have no legal right to step in. This news hits hard, leaving him feeling completely powerless to help. Looking down, he starts to wonder if his own meddling is what ruined the village's quiet life in the first place. Rand catches the guilt on his face and softens his expression. He tells him to quit stressing because he's already cooking up a countermeasure to handle the mess. He plans to register the land around the village under the official control of the Adventurers Guild. Master catches on quickly, realizing this means any outsider gathering resources without a quest will be breaking the law. Holding up a stack of documents, Rand says he's heading to the royal capital to make it official and asks everyone to look after the village for a few days. While Rand heads out, Master and the girl stay behind, hoping things stay quiet until he gets back. That peace doesn't last long, because a giant system window suddenly slams into view. He freezes, staring at the bright new label and the strange text appearing in the air. Looking closer, he realizes it's the start of the Okoya quest, which usually means things are about to get complicated. He stares at the wooden board, wondering if this is just a way to scare off poachers by warning them of bad luck. Even so, he worries that putting up threats like this might actually give the village a bad reputation. The girl thinks it's a fantastic idea, insisting that keeping the forest safe is the only thing that really matters right now. Looking at the sign itself, it's covered in blocky, strange symbols that promise a curse for anyone who messes with the woods. A scruffy poacher scoffs at the warning sign, figuring the whole curse idea is just a prank. Ignoring the threat, he heads deeper into the trees with a wolf-headed beast man to find some rare phantom gold using mandragora leaves as bait. As he shoves his spade into the dirt, he laughs about how even a single catch will land them 3 gold coins. Suddenly, the beast man freezes. He catches a strange sound in the brush and looks back, wondering what's out there. Suddenly, a massive white phantom towers over them. The beast man freezes on the spot, staring up at the giant figure in total shock. Panicked, he and the scruffy poacher both scream and bolt into the woods, terrified that the curse on the sign was real after all. Watching from a safe distance, the girl smiles and tells Master her plan worked perfectly. As the ghost zooms past them, it shows it's actually just Pei-chan running under a big white sheet. Master gives the little dragon a thumbs up for a job well done. A system window pops up to confirm the warning signs worked, but a new objective appears about a dragon attacking people. Master looks at the screen, wondering if they really need to go that far. Nearby, the terrified poachers scramble away as fast as they can, shouting about curses. As the ghost retreats into the woods, the sheet snags on a sharp branch and tears right off. Free from the disguise, the little dragon chirps happily as he glides through the air. Instead of flying away, he lands right in front of the poachers with a heavy thud. Tumbling across the grass, the little guy lets out a flurry of confused chirps. He is completely exposed now, rolling around without his sheet to hide him. The beast man freezes, his eyes going wide as he realizes he is looking at an actual baby dragon. He figures this is a once-in-a-lifetime find and tells his buddy they are taking it with them. While Master waits with the girl, he starts to worry because the little guy hasn't come back yet. A sudden shout from the distance breaks the silence. Rushing out of the forest, Nina screams that the poachers grabbed Pei-chan and are making a break for it. The news hits them hard, leaving them both frozen in shock. They watch the poachers sprint into the woods with the heavy sack bouncing on their backs. Inside the bag, the little dragon's muffled cries grow faint as the distance between them gets wider. The girl begins to blame herself for the disaster, but Master steadies her and says they're going after him right now. Just then, the system pings with a new quest to hide the treasure in darkness. Nina asks if they should just destroy the thieves, while he tries to figure out why the game is calling Pei-chan treasure. The poachers don't wait for an answer, hurrying through the woods with their prize while celebrating the massive haul. Spotting a carriage on the path ahead, the beast man waves his arms and shouts for a ride straight to the capital. He's already dreaming of being a billionaire, figuring this little dragon is his ticket to the high life. That fantasy ends when Nina drops from the sky with a sharp cry. She lands right in their path, catching them completely off guard. Before they can react, she whips out a massive cloth to smother the entire carriage, while Master shouts for her to wrap them up tight. Rushing toward the panic, the girl finally spots Pei-chan trapped in the mess. Master gives a quick nod, glad to see the plan is actually working. The heavy fabric tangles in the spinning wheels and brings the getaway to a screeching halt, leaving the poachers completely pinned down. With the poachers pinned down, the group rushes over to the back of the wagon to check on their friend. Pulling Pei-chan into a tight hug, the girl sobs and tells the little dragon how sorry she is for letting him get caught. Master and Nina look on with a quiet smile as she thanks them both for the help. He returns the smile, feeling a quiet sense of relief now that everyone is finally safe. Looking at his screen, though, he tilts his head in confusion, wondering why the quest isn't showing up as cleared yet. Still, he figures they've done enough and suggests the group start making their way back to Lara Village. Meanwhile, the poachers are still pinned under that heavy cloth, swearing about how they let a literal fortune slip through their fingers. The scruffy one tries to stay positive, clutching a small pouch of phantom gold he managed to keep hidden. But he isn't out of the woods yet, letting out a terrified scream as something nearby catches his eye. A massive wave of black birds comes down from the sky, swarming the area in an instant. The poacher looks up in horror, seeing a single glowing eye staring right through him from the darkness. Suddenly, the gold he was so proud of changes, turning into a cluster of glowing beetles that scuttle out of the bag. Terrified, both men turn and bolt while the swarm keeps dive-bombing them from every angle. As they run, the cage hits the ground and bursts open, releasing the rest of the captured creatures back into the woods. The poachers flail around while the birds dive-bomb them, yelling for the hooded girl to watch out. She stays perfectly still, completely ignored by the flurry of wings. Nina's eyes snap wide when she realizes the swarm is hitting her too, frozen as a beetle lands right on her neck. Then the whole forest fills with screams as the poachers realize they're being covered in bugs. Looking down at the woods, Master points out something important for everyone to see. Lara Village is finally officially on the map. Holding up the document with a huge grin, the chief shouts the news while the crowd breaks into a cheer. Master notes that with this new status, the Adventurers Guild can finally help deal with any future trouble. Feeling much better, the man agrees that they won't be on their own anymore. Even so, Master wonders about the shift in atmosphere since he's only been away for a few days. He asks Nina if something happened while he was gone, but she just gives him a nervous, awkward smile. She brushes it off and stretches her arms, happy that the whole ordeal is finally over. Smiling, she figures she can take it easy now and go hunting for some rare silver amber in the forest. But someone immediately shuts that idea down, leaving her looking completely confused. One of the villagers explains that being an official guild town comes with a few new rules. Since the village is on the map, they can't just forage in the woods whenever they want without a permit. From now on, taking anything from the forest without permission is officially against the rules. Nina stares in total disbelief, her face going pale as she processes that her easy hunting days are over. She lets out a scream of despair that echoes all the way across the snowy mountain range. Just like that, The peaceful prologue of their journey comes to a sudden halt. Far away from the village, a massive scaly claw slams into the dirt, signaling the arrival of a real threat. The creature leans its massive head down to check on the figure standing nearby. As the dragon asks if he's alright, Sophie gives a short, calm reply. He stands facing two of the white beasts, looking remarkably relaxed for the situation. Chuckling to himself, he mentions he was worried about losing their egg. Still, he's impressed they managed to track him down on their own. He spreads his arms wide, announcing that with this, the demon race can finally begin their revenge against the kingdom. Behind him, a massive, shadowy face looms over the scene, making the scale of his plan clear. The white dragon stares in silence, its eye wide with realization as it lets out a pained groan. It seems to realize too late what kind of person it was actually following. He just lets out a sharp, jagged smile, looking completely satisfied with the chaos he's about to cause. Looking up at the massive shadow, he calls it grandfather and orders it to eat everyone in sight. The beast's glowing eyes and sharp teeth fill the sky, making the village look tiny and helpless. This reveal makes one thing certain: the peaceful days are officially over.